Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Gretchen Harrington. Gretchen Harrington was born on June 13, 1967, in Pennsylvania. She was the youngest of 3 daughters, but her family didn't stay in Pennsylvania for long. Soon after her birth, they moved to the small town of Bumo, where her father, a pastor, obtained a job at the local church. Gretchen immediately loved this new town. She spends a lot of time outdoors with her sisters and her new friends. The town was incredibly safe, giving parents felt comfortable letting their children play outside until nightfall. The town of Bumo seemed to be the ideal place for kids from a religious family to grow up. As a result, Gretchen spent a lot of time at her father's church and excelled in Sunday school, consistently earning top grades. On August 15, 1975, Gretchen's mother and newborn sister were set to return home from the hospital. 8-year-old Gretchen was excited to meet her new sibling. However, her father reminded her not to miss Sunday school, considering her perfect attendance record and high grades. Although Gretchen was hesitant, but she decided to attend church, taking her Bible along. Normally, she would have walked to church with her older sisters, but on that morning, they stayed home. The church was only a short distance away, less than a mile, so she didn't feel afraid to walk alone. The Sunday school lessons were divided into 2 sessions. First, the children gathered at Trinity Church, and after about an hour and a half, some of them, including Gretchen, were to head to her father's church. However, when the kids arrived at the second church at 11:30 a.m., Gretchen's father noticed that his daughter was missing. Thinking that Gretchen might have stayed at the first church, her father called Trinity Church to check. David's wife, a Sunday school teacher and pastor's spouse, answered the call. She reported that Gretchen was not there. She immediately informed her husband, David, about the situation. He was surprised to hear this, as Gretchen had not been in attendance at his Sunday school class that morning. Growing increasingly worried, Gretchen's father asked David to contact the police while he began searching for his daughter. He drove along the route between the 2 churches, checked nearby streets, and reached out to the parents of Gretchen's friends, but she was nowhere to be found. Her friends were all either at church or at home, and Gretchen's best friend, who was David's daughter, hadn't seen her all day. The police quickly launched a search for Gretchen. As people learned about her disappearance, they rallied together to help find her. Since Gretchen's father is a well-respected local pastor, hundreds of volunteers joined the search, many of whom knew and admired him. The volunteers and police scoured the town and surrounding areas, including wooded regions and the riverbank. A police helicopter even assisted the search from above. Despite the extensive search continuing late into the night, but they still couldn't find Gretchen. The search for Gretchen continued to grow the following day, with even more volunteers joining To aid in the search, the police created and distributed flyers displaying Gretchen's photo and details about her disappearance to motorists and along roads. Despite these extensive efforts, the police were unable to uncover any leads or determine what had happened to Gretchen. As the days went by with no new information, Gretchen's disappearance remained a mystery, deeply impacting the town. In the past, it was common for children to have the freedom to roam the streets without adult supervision. They would often spend hours exploring the woods and swimming in the nearby river with no one watching over them, and their parents rarely worried. However, the recent disappearance of Gretchen changed everything, which sparked widespread fear and anxiety among residents. As people tried to make sense of what had happened, various theories emerged. Some speculated that Gretchen might have left home voluntarily, while others believed she may have drowned while swimming in the river. The most disturbing theory, however, was that she had been kidnapped. As a result, parents became extremely cautious, no longer letting their children out without supervision. One mother even went as far as cutting her daughter's hair short to disguise her as a boy. Overnight, the once peaceful town turned into a place of uncertainty and fear. Police have also questioned anyone who may be involved in Gretchen's disappearance. They gathered several new leads from conversations with witnesses. One witness reported seeing a girl who resembled Gretchen near the church that morning, approached by a green station wagon. However, the witness did not see what happened next. Another person shared a similar story, but described a white Cadillac approaching the girl. The police investigated these leads by identifying and checking the owners of matching vehicles in the area. Unfortunately, this did not yield any results. 4 days later, a resident of Westchester, a nearby town, contacted the police after finding children's shorts that matched the description of Gretchen's clothing. Investigators showed the shorts to Gretchen's mother, but she confirmed they did not belong to her daughter. From then on, there was still no progress in the case. The search operation was eventually suspended, and the focus shifted to the investigation. The police continued to interview witnesses and follow up on any available leads. However, as time passed, the chances of finding Gretchen alive grew increasingly slim. On October 14th, a jogger in a national park, approximately 20 minutes from Bumo, made a noticed something strange in the bushes. Initially, he wasn't sure what it was, but upon closer inspection, he realized it was a human body. The jogger immediately reported the things to the park rangers, who then alerted the police. Upon investigation, the authorities determined that the remains belonged to a child. However, identifying the child to be extremely difficult due to the advanced state of decomposition. Investigators initially suspected it might be Gretchen, so they showed her parents pictures of the clothes found next to the remains. These clothes had been carefully folded. Gretchen's mother confirmed the clothes found belonged to her daughter, as she had made them herself. Forensic experts further the identification by matching the remains to Gretchen's dental records. The cause of death was determined to be multiple severe blows to the head, and the case was reclassified as a homicide. The body was so decomposed that investigators were unable to determine any further details about the circumstances surrounding her death, including whether she had been sexually assaulted. Additionally, DNA analysis technology was not available at the time, 1975, leaving investigators without any DNA clues to pursue. The town was shaken by the news of Gretchen's murder, leading to an influx of tips for the police. As concerns about a violent offender still on the loose grew, citizens urged authorities to swiftly bring the perpetrator to justice. As the investigation continued, authorities received numerous tips about suspicious individuals seen in the park where Gretchen's body was found. Unfortunately, these leads did not aid in the case. Investigators also thoroughly vetted nearby residents with a history of violent crimes, but this approach yielded no results. Several months after the body was discovered, the case came to a standstill with no new developments. In subsequent years, detectives would periodically reopen the case, thoroughly reviewing existing leads and tips, but to no avail. This was largely due to a lack of evidence. Even with advancements in DNA analysis, the police found no concrete leads. No foreign DNA was found on Gretchen's body or her clothes, leaving the case unsolved for decades. The investigation was periodically mentioned in the media, but public interest waned. Following the crime, parents in the town became highly cautious and protective of their children due to fearing another attack. This collective fear lingered for years, changing the lives of Brawl's children. Months later, a crucial piece of information came to light. A woman contacted the authorities to share her account and met with the lead detective to tell her story. At the time of Gretchen's murder, the woman was 10 years old and lived in Havertone, close to Gretchen's home. She was friends with Gretchen and her older sisters, as well as other kids in the neighborhood. The woman often slept over at her friends' houses. One incident, in particular, stood out and was pivotal to her coming forward. While sleeping over at a friend's house, the woman woke up in the middle of the night to find the friend's father touching her. She then saw him quickly leave the room and was too afraid to tell anyone. However, the same thing happened again the following night. The next morning, she confided in one of her friends, who surprisingly revealed that this was a common occurrence. The friend's father would often come into their room at night. The woman immediately reported this to her parents when she returned home. But instead of contacting the police, they simply forbade her from visiting the friend's house again. This disturbing incident occurred just 1 week before Gretchen's disappearance. The woman shared a crucial piece of information with the authorities: the name of the man she suspected, David Zandstra, a pastor who taught at the Sunday school. However, her account didn't end there. She also shared a disturbing incident involving one of her friends, which happened a month after Gretchen's disappearance. This friend was approached by a man who tried to kidnap, but her friend managed to avoid the situation by refusing to get into his car. The man who made the attempt was none other than David Zandstra. To support her claim, the woman provided detectives with her personal diary from that period. In the diary entry dated September 15, 1975, she recorded a conversation with her friend, who had begged her to keep a secret due to concerns that David might cause her harm. With this new information, the police reopened the case. Upon re-examining the original case materials, detectives uncovered several suspicious details that indirectly pointed to David's involvement. Notably, it was he who initially reported Gretchen's disappearance to the authorities. The pastor David gave investigators a precise description of Gretchen's clothing: dark blue zip-up shorts with front studs and pockets. He also mentioned a white top and braided hair. However, David claimed that he had not seen Gretchen that day. This raised a question: how did he know what she wore, especially since his description's claim was later confirmed to be true after Candy's body was found, as she was wearing the exact same clothes he described. Further investigation revealed that the Sunday school classes were delayed by 50 minutes due to the pastor David's late arrival. This delay would have given him enough time to abduct Gretchen, kill her, dispose of her body in the park, and return to the church to begin teaching. According to David's initial statement, he drove some children in his van to Candy's father's church after the classes, and only became aware of Candy's absence when her father said it out to him. A significant detail in the case was that David, his wife, and their 3 children relocated to another state just months after Gretchen's disappearance. Notably, David owned multiple vehicles, including a green station wagon that drew police attention. A witness had previously reported seeing a similar vehicle near the church on the day Gretchen vanished. Given these clues, detectives decided to interrogate David. At 83 years old and residing in Georgia, David agreed to speak with detectives at the local police station on July 17, 2023. When David realized the detectives suspected him of murder, he initially responded with denial, asking what evidence they had against him. However, the detectives revealed 2 key pieces of evidence: a woman's testimony about an incident at his house, and allegations of him molesting his own daughters. David's demeanor drastically changed. As he realized his dark past was exposed, he stopped denying the accusations and, after 48 years of silence, he began to speak about the murder. According to David's account, on a Sunday morning, he drove his green American Motor station wagon to Gretchen's father's church. There, he saw Gretchen walking outside and offered to give her a ride. Gretchen accepted, likely because their families were friends, and she was also on her way to his Sunday school classes. However, instead of taking Gretchen to the church, David drove her to a secluded park area. He ordered her to undress, but she refused and she asked to be taken home. David then hit Gretchen repeatedly on the head, knocking her unconscious. After Gretchen lost consciousness, David removed her clothes and assaulted her. He then drove her to another park and checked for a pulse, but found none. Believing she was dead, he carried her body into the bushes and covered it with branches. David then returned to the church to teach his Sunday school class. After he confessed, the police arrested him to Gretchen's murder and had him extradited to Pennsylvania to face trial. His arrest sparked a wider and more thorough investigation. Detectives suspected that David had assaulted multiple girls, and they strongly believed there were additional victims. The fact that he had been a pastor in various cities and states for decades led as it suggested he may have committed many more crimes. Because David was a pastor, respected by everyone, he initially was not suspected. However, with the truth finally exposed, detectives collected his DNA sample and began comparing it to evidence in unsolved cases. They also investigated unsolved disappearances of girls in cities where he had been employed. Investigators quickly identified a case similar to that of Gretchen. In 1991, 4-year-old Amanda Campbell from California, she vanished from her home in a quiet neighborhood without leaving any clues. Notably, at the time of Amanda's disappearance, David was a pastor in that same neighborhood. Although there is currently no evidence linking him to the crime, police have identified similarities between the two cases, suggesting he could be a suspect. David Zanstra, now 83, is being held in a jail in Cobb County, Georgia. He was denied bail and denied extradition to Pennsylvania, despite he filing an extradition request. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Dana Laskowski. At approximately 11 a.m. on August 31, 2001, a couple from a small town near Seattle, Washington, called the police to request a welfare check on their nanny, Dana Laskowski, 36. She had never been late before, but that day, she did not show up. Although Dana had been caring for the couple's children for a long time and had always been reliable, the police then went to Dana's house at the address provided by the couple but found no one at the door. The officers then began searching the surrounding area and peering through the windows. A second officer checked the rooms through the windows until he reached the living room. It was dark and quiet inside, and he noticed a woman lying on the sofa under a blanket. At first, the officer thought she was just sleeping, however. He wondered why she did not respond to the repeated knocking. When he shined his flashlight into the room, he saw the woman in an unusual position. With one hand behind her back, she was still, indicating that something was seriously wrong. All the windows were locked and the blinds were drawn, so the scene could only be seen clearly from the inside. Fortunately for the police, the back door was open, suggesting that the criminal had entered and left through that door. The police entered Dana's home and discovered drops of blood on the floor, some of which appeared to be smeared, indicating that there had been an effort to wipe them away. Dana was dead, and there were no signs of abuse. Bruises were visible on her neck, elbows, and knees. An autopsy revealed multiple fractures. The medical examiner determined that Dana died from strangulation. The police believe that the perpetrator entered the home with the intention of killing her. Not by accident, they found a broken window in the basement, which they suspect was the killer's point of entry. While some valuables were missing from Dana's residence, it appeared that furniture and items had been thrown from drawers onto the floor. However, this looked more like a staged crime scene than a sign of a robbery. As the police walked through the kitchen, they noticed a knife rack that had been completely untouched. This could indicate that the attacker had carefully planned the crime in advance. Typically, victims would be struck in the face or head to disorient them, but there were no signs of such injuries on Dana. It appeared that Dana had been strangled instantly. Forensic experts understand that strangulation is not as simple as it appears. It is a lengthy process that requires considerable strength and endurance. An autopsy found only a single mark on Dana's neck, suggesting that her attacker had held her down. When the police discovered that Dana was the mother of 9-year-old triplets. They were anxious to search her home for the children. Fortunately, they discovered that the children were not present at the time of the attack. The events that unfolded shocked the entire local community. Dana was known for her kindness and sensitivity, making her an unlikely victim of a violent crime. She avoided conflict and did not participate in illegal activities. The police compiled a list of suspects when they began investigating messages from the security service regarding Dana's acquaintances. To all who knew her, she was considered a creative and caring person. Dana's creativity stemmed from her father, a highly recognized artist, while her caring nature was inherited from her mother. This nurturing trait guided her life path. Growing up, she often babysat and was highly regarded by her neighbors for her skills. Dana aspired to open her own private kindergarten more than anything. She longed to be a mother, but this dream proved difficult to achieve. In 1989, when she was 24, she met a man named Sam. Romance quickly blossomed between the young couple, and they were married within months. Dana longed to start a family, but she faced infertility challenges. After 4 years of treatment, she learned she was pregnant with triplets, 2 boys and a girl. It was a moment she and her husband had long awaited. However, new challenges arose. Dana became famous when she shared her story with a local newspaper in 1992, discussing the difficulties she faced throughout her pregnancy. In her 5th month, she was hospitalized and told by doctors that she could give birth within 72 hours and that they might lose their baby girl. The couple cried all night over the news. Dana was then advised to rest completely at the clinic. Miraculously, she managed to carry the pregnancy to 8 months. This was a difficult period, but also a significant victory for her, something she often talked about later. In April 1993, she gave birth to triplets. The girl was the smallest, weighing just 1.5 kg, while the boys each weighed around 2 kg. The couple began to face new challenges when it came to raising children, which was not easy. However, Dana handled the situation very well. In 1996, she was interviewed as a local celebrity for having given birth to triplets. When asked about raising 3 children at once, she humorously recounted the moment when she was so exhausted that she went to the shops in her pajamas and slippers. Tragically, Dana, the proud mother of 3, was found strangled in her own living room. The police are investigating her surroundings to determine who might be responsible. It was revealed that in 2000, after 11 years of marriage, Dana chose to divorce Sam and raise the children on her own, along with her 3 children. Her 17-year-old niece, Amanda, who frequently ran away from home, and a friend named Emily Lauenborg also moved in with Dana after the tragedy. The police found very little evidence at the scene. They needed to interview all of Dana's relatives, starting with her ex-husband Sam. Initially, there were suspicions surrounding him. The police tried to inform him of the tragedy, but were unsuccessful. They also needed to check on the triplets, who were believed to be with Sam at the time. Sam did not answer calls for several days, raising serious concerns about his involvement. However, Sam eventually called the police back, explaining that he had gone camping with the children and was unaware of the situation. He said they had no cell service at their campsite, so they were unable to listen to any voice messages from family members upon returning from the trip. Sam and the children were shocked to discover multiple voice messages from the police, family, and friends, all relaying the tragic news of Dana's death and the urgent search for Sam and the children. At this point, Sam became the prime suspect in the case. The police suspected that he may have intentionally run away and kidnapped the children. The couple may have had ongoing disputes over child custody, alimony, and unresolved issues from their divorce, which could have provided him with a possible motive. The police discovered that Sam was unhappy with the court's custody ruling. He wanted to spend more time with the children, but his access was severely restricted. Additionally, Dana had moved away, making it difficult for him to visit and be with the children. Several witnesses noted that he was greatly affected by divorce, viewing her actions as an attempt to tear their family apart. However, he never acted cruelly or aggressively toward her or the children. The police quickly noticed that he was a tall man, indicating that he had the physical strength to handle Dana. Their suspicions grew as they spoke with him. He refused to provide fingerprints and a DNA sample, claiming that he did not want to be named as a suspect. Sam also mentioned that his DNA samples were at the Dana house because he frequently visited during meetings with the children. He had several cuts on his legs, which he said he received while playing baseball with his sons, a claim that was later verified. Sam insisted that he had been with his sons the entire time. 3 hours away from Dana's house, he even had a gas station receipt to back up his alibi. The triplets confirmed that they had been with their father the entire time and that he had not left to go on any long trips. While it was theoretically possible that Sam could have driven 3 hours to the house, committed the act, and returned while the children were asleep, this scenario seemed unlikely. A caring father would not have left his children alone in the woods for 6-7 hours, and the children repeatedly claimed that he had been with them the entire time. When the children woke up at night, he would have gently covered them with a blanket. It seemed improbable that they would have been forced to lie in such a situation, especially since their statements were completely consistent. As a result, Sam was quickly eliminated as a suspect after these events. Sam's 3 children moved in with him now. It was necessary to investigate other potential suspects, but this proved challenging. Even Dana's niece, Amanda, who lived with her most of the time and probably knew her better than anyone else, had no idea who could have harmed her. Amanda described her aunt as her second mother and best friend. She stated that she was not home the night Dana was murdered and therefore did not know if Dana was expecting visitors. Dana was known to be quite sociable, often welcoming friends at all hours. She was so trusting that she often left her back door unlocked, allowing anyone to enter. Dana was also a very attractive woman, which could have attracted the attention of dangerous people. The police found the family's behavior quite alarming and contacted them to conduct a welfare check on Dana. It was clear that they knew something, which led the police to question them again. They were the ones who hired Dana as a nanny. When asked by the police about the situation, they shared that in Dana's neighborhood, there was a man named Patrick who was installing internet cable. He met Dana unexpectedly and, for a month, kept asking her out on dates. He left poems and notes on her back door, which she ignored. According to the family who hired Dana, she had no interest in Patrick. However, his letters became increasingly alarming and disturbing as he began to stalk her and detail her activities at specific times before her death. Dana even contacted a friend, urging her to ask the police to review her phone records if anything happened to her. She expressed that Patrick's constant phone calls frightened her. The police investigated this information and confirmed that an unknown phone number had called Dana multiple times on the night of her murder. They identified a white construction truck as being involved in the calls, and several witnesses reported seeing a similar vehicle behind Dana's home that evening. The police contacted Patrick's employer, who confirmed the witnesses' accounts. As a result, the police quickly obtained a search warrant for Patrick's home. From the start, Patrick was uncooperative and aggressive, which raised suspicions about him. He seemed reluctant to talk to the police. Initially, Patrick believed that the police were questioning him because Dana had filed a complaint against him. He admitted to stalking her and exhibiting obsessive behavior. However, when he was informed that the police were investigating Dana's murder, his demeanor changed completely. He became frightened, confused, and upset, and began to cooperate with the investigation. He provided his fingerprints and claimed that he had nothing to do with the murder. He also agreed to let the police search his home. Despite his previous objections during the search, Patrick appeared to be very upset about Dana's death. During the investigation, the police found several letters addressed to a woman that were violent in nature. However, the details and descriptions of this woman did not match Dana. These letters were actually addressed to Patrick's ex-wife and reflected his unresolved anger toward her. Patrick recounted his activities on the night Dana was killed. He said he went to work and then attended a party with friends. Initially, the police doubted his story, but several witnesses confirmed his alibi, making him seem less likely to be the killer. The truck associated with Patrick was investigated and found to be unrelated to a vehicle seen near Dana's house. It belonged to another employee of the same organization. As a result, Patrick was removed from the suspect list. However, the police still had some doubts about him, as there was a possibility that witnesses might have been dishonest. The police then turned their attention to a third suspect, Dana's new boyfriend. Michael lived in Canada. It was revealed that Michael had a hot temper and was aggressive. Dana confided in a friend that if anything happened to her, the police should investigate Michael. They then decided to go to Canada to talk to him. Michael admitted that there were problems in their relationship on the night of the murder. He had a long phone conversation with Dana, during which she seemed unusually distant and cold. Even ignoring his words at the end of the conversation, this behavior made him extremely angry. Michael later planned to meet Dana in person to discuss their relationship, but he was unable to contact her, and he was not allowed to cross the border. His alibi was confirmed. He was still in another country and did not cross the border, which cleared him of all suspicions. The police soon focused on Dana's niece, Amanda, who left a note in the condolence book after Dana's funeral. In the note, she apologized to Dana for not being a better niece and stated that she was now sober. There was something about the way she wrote that suggested it was a message of remorse to Dana. It was clear that Dana cared deeply for her niece Amanda. She welcomed Amanda and her friends, often inviting them to her home, where Amanda would feed them and sometimes provide money or shelter when they needed it. The police then brought Amanda in for questioning. She mentioned a dangerous person in her group named Blaine, revealing that he had strangled her when she refused his advances. Amanda suspected that something similar might have happened to Dana. Amanda also recalled seeing Blaine with scratches on his arm after Dana's death. Blaine had a history of drug-related offenses. When the police tried to find him, they discovered that he was on probation and had fled the state, making him a wanted man. They eventually found him in Georgia, and the police requested his extradition. Unfortunately, it took time to resolve all the administrative issues, so the police decided to investigate the rest of the group. During this time, a member of their group ended up in jail. The police chose to speak to him directly. He seemed just as suspicious as Blaine, but quickly claimed that his gang was not responsible for Dana's death. He revealed that Emily Lauenborg, Amanda's best friend, was a frequent visitor to their home. Emily and Amanda were rebellious teenagers who often stayed with Dana. Initially, the police were skeptical of the information they received. They felt that Emily, a short, slender 17-year-old girl, might not have been strong enough to take on a grown woman. However, as they spoke to other members of the group, the investigation took a different direction. They learned from multiple sources that Emily was known for her incredible physical strength, which belied her appearance. Emily had a history of fighting and reckless behavior. Witnesses described an incident in which she overpowered a much larger adult man. Emily's actions were quite violent. She had tortured and killed animals. The teenagers provided the police with crucial information, revealing that Emily's preferred method of strangulation involved placing a person's hands behind their back. This technique closely resembled the position of Dana's body after her death, raising serious concerns for the police. Emily was then questioned by the police. She denied all charges, claiming that her friends had lied and tried to implicate her. However, she was unable to provide an alibi for the time of the murder. A search warrant was issued for Emily's room, where the police discovered some clothing belonging to Dana. It was revealed that Emily had worn one of these blouses to the funeral. Additionally, Emily's diary was found, containing disturbing entries. One entry expressed her desire to kill, indicating her wish to harm someone and escape without facing consequences. In her diary, she wrote that, after an argument with Amanda. She wanted to strangle her, according to Emily's parents. She left the house on the night of the murder, as she often did. Being a rebellious teenager, she announced that she was going to sleep over at a friend's house, which was typical of her behavior, so her parents didn't question her. With all the evidence the police had gathered being circumstantial, they decided to employ a specific tactic. They brought Amanda in for questioning and told her that they were aware of her lies. Without revealing any specifics, this approach proved effective. Amanda, Dana's niece, admitted to Emily's involvement. She revealed that both she and Emily had returned to Dana's house on the night of the murder while under the influence of drugs. They had used various substances throughout the night to the point where they could not recall which ones they had taken. The girls entered the house through an open back door and began rummaging through Dana's belongings in search of money. Dana noticed them and confronted them about their actions. When Dana asked them to leave, Emily became angry and insisted that she would not leave without the money. When Dana refused to give them cash, Emily became enraged and attacked her, strangling her. Amanda was so frightened that she turned away and closed her eyes to avoid witnessing anything. She did not see her friend confront her aunt, but she heard a crack, which she interpreted as a bone breaking, followed by a final gasp that signaled the end of the struggle. After the attack, Amanda and Emily grabbed the two cats and left. Emily attacked Dana, who had cared for her like a mother. In a sudden outburst of violent rage, Emily interpreted Dana's kindness as a sign of weakness and took advantage of it. She was not accustomed to rejection, which made her extremely angry. The police speculated that drugs may have played a role, but others believed that deeper issues were at play. Dana had objected to Emily's friendship with a dangerous person. Having noticed Emily's behavior deteriorating over time, the police did not have strong evidence against Emily. So, they focused on Amanda as their best chance for conviction. They offered Amanda a deal if she testified again before the grand jury. All charges against her would be dropped. Granting her immunity, Amanda accepted the deal. However, the prosecution's case in the Supreme Court remained weak. Emily was eventually offered a plea deal, which she accepted. Admitting her guilt, this allowed her to avoid a harsh sentence. Emily Launborg was later sentenced to 7 years in prison. Emily changed her name and got married. She had 2 children, but later divorced. She is no longer in contact with Amanda. Welcome back. Detectives, let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jennifer Logsdon. Tommy Smith was a third-year student at a local college. His girlfriend, Jennifer Logsdon, had just finished her first year at the same school before they met. Jennifer had been living in the dorms, but was bored with the constant partying. She wanted a quieter place to study when her longtime friend, Casey Johnson, decided to attend the same college. They saw a great opportunity to rent a house together. They all agreed on a small rental home in Peoria, Illinois, and pooled their money to make it work. Everything seemed fine until a hot summer day. On July 19, 1991, at that time, 20 years old, Tommy and his 19-year-old fiancée, Jennifer, were busy preparing for their wedding. They planned to start a family after finishing their education and securing jobs. They are enjoying the weekend. With Casey, the 3 of them had been living together for a while, getting along well and supporting each other. Tommy and Jennifer even intended to continue living in the house after their wedding. On the evening of July 19, 1991, Tommy, Jennifer, and Casey gathered to watch a movie together. They chose a horror film by Stephen King. They set up a mattress taken from the bedroom, prepared some snacks, and made themselves comfortable. It seemed like a typical evening, and no one could predict the nightmare that was about to unfold. After a while, Jennifer fell asleep, followed by Tommy, while Casey went to a different room to sleep. In the middle of the night, Jennifer woke up to a terrifying scream coming from nearby. Feeling confused and bewildered in the darkness, she noticed Tommy fighting with a stranger. The attacker was a large black man with bloodshot eyes and a knife in his hand. Despite looking very intimidating, Tommy fought fiercely with the attacker, who struck him with many powerful blows. Obviously, this tall man was stronger and more aggressive than Tommy, but Tommy still fought back with all his might. Jennifer felt confused and helpless. She noticed something strange. The attacker had socks on his hands while his feet were bare. She realized that Tommy was losing strength, but she herself was unable to move due to shock and fear. Tommy was attacked in the chest and neck when Tommy collapsed. Jennifer knew that the attacker was going to continue. He aimed at her and attacked with the knife, desperately. Jennifer fought back with all her strength. At one point, she managed to overpower the attacker and take the knife from him, but she had already sustained serious injuries and could no longer fight. The knife slipped from her hand and fell to the floor. The attacker picked up the knife again and attacked her, quickly knocking her unconscious. At that moment, a conversation could be heard coming from the room where Casey was sleeping. Realizing the danger, Casey called 911 for help. Unfortunately, the connection was poor, or the operator was distracted. As they repeatedly asked for information, the attacker, hearing the commotion, became enraged. He seemed to want to kill her. He broke the lock and rushed into the room. Casey barely had time to finish her sentence and hung up on emergency services because he attacked her. Casey pleaded for her life, begging him not to hurt her. However, the assailant lunged at Casey, striking her in the face and chest. Despite her efforts to defend herself, she was overpowered by the attacker during the struggle. The knife blade became badly bent and eventually broke off from the handle, leaving the assailant without a weapon. By this time, Casey had already suffered several serious injuries, including to her throat. After the incident, the attacker picked up the broken blade and fled the scene. Fortunately, Casey managed to call the police. Officers arrived at the house around 3 a.m. Upon entering, they were met with a horrifying sight: items scattered and equipment damaged, indicating that a violent struggle had taken place. Amidst the chaos, they found Tommy lying unconscious on the floor, with multiple injuries. Despite his injuries, he bravely protected Jennifer and Casey. Fortunately, Jennifer and Casey were still alive and remained conscious for several minutes after the police arrived. Paramedics were on the scene, attempting to save them. Jennifer seemed to be the most distressed. She expressed her fear of death and begged for help for Tommy and Casey. At that time, her boyfriend, Tommy, was unconscious, very pale, and had lost a lot of blood, but he was still breathing. Afterward, both Jennifer and Casey believed that they had survived the attack thanks to Tommy's brave actions. The attacker hit Tommy so hard that his knife bent and he lost much of his strength as a result. He was no longer able to inflict deep wounds, only superficial ones, however. Without immediate medical attention, both Jennifer and Casey would have died from blood loss. Fortunately, help arrived in time, and they were saved. They were taken to the hospital and placed in the intensive care unit. Their lives were very fragile. Tommy, however, was not as fortunate. He sustained the most severe injuries and bled to death. Passing away just after the paramedics arrived, his family was not surprised by his actions. They felt immense pride in him. Tommy was always selfless and loving, a true hero who protected Jennifer and Casey. Jennifer believed he would have made a wonderful husband and father, with a bright future ahead of him. Sadly, she never had the chance to experience that future. Investigators aimed to gather information about the attacker to begin their search. This individual was clearly dangerous and posed a threat to society, potentially targeting more victims at that very moment. Although the attacker was not masked, the darkness made it impossible for Casey and Jennifer to provide a detailed description. They could only say he was a strong black man. However, they did recall an important detail. He had socks on his hands and was barefoot. It appeared he had put on gloves just before the attack to avoid leaving fingerprints. But he did leave footprints, which could help identify him. Given this information, the police concluded that the suspect likely lived nearby, as it would be difficult to walk long distances on asphalt without shoes. This insight helped the officers narrow down their list of potential suspects to those with prior assault convictions. One suspect was ruled out because he was already in custody for another crime. Another young man, known for violent offenses, had a solid alibi. That was confirmed. The police had only one suspect left to investigate: Jennifer's neighbor, Jean Brown, 27 years old, who lived across the street. When the police went to Jean's house to check, they found a blood stain on the mosquito netting of a window. Jean explained that the blood came from a cut he had sustained in the kitchen the night before. However, this explanation was not convincing and made him the prime suspect. He was taken to the police station for questioning. Meanwhile, the forensic scientist was investigating the crime scene for evidence and found several important clues. One clue was an invitation to a party that Jennifer, Tommy, and Casey were planning for the following weekend. It had fallen to the floor during the struggle. They also found human footprints on the ground. These footprints indicated that the attacker was barefoot, which could lead to valuable clues upon comparison. It was determined that the footprint matched Jean Brown's. Additionally, forensic experts discovered tiny drops of blood in his hair. Jean understood that he was facing serious charges that could result in severe penalties. The investigators were pressuring him and encouraging him to confess so that he could receive a lighter sentence. Eventually, Jean began to share his version of events. He claimed that he only intended to confront Tommy, but when Tommy resisted, he lost control. Jean noticed that Jennifer had woken up, and, in a panic, he attacked her as well. Hearing a noise from Casey's room, he thought his only option to avoid arrest was to eliminate everyone in the house. However, he could not explain why he attacked them. The police were actively gathering evidence, confirming that Jean had broken into the house at night with the intention of stealing money and purchasing banned substances, a claim he later made in order not to leave fingerprints. He wore socks on his hands. However, he did not know that footprints were as distinctive as fingerprints. If he had realized this, he might have worn socks on his feet too. His testimony sounds like a detective story, but in reality, it is very unconvincing. Using a knife to try to steal just a few dollars seems absurd. The choice of a house where 3 unemployed students live together may seem strange. What was his plan? How could he buy banned substances without a strategy? These questions didn't align with the overall situation, and it seemed unimaginable that a small robbery could end with 3 people being brutally harmed. In this situation, investigators suspect that Jean's real targets were Casey and Jennifer. He may have wanted to abuse them. Perhaps that was the reason he attacked Tommy first. To eliminate the main threat to his plan, it appears Jean underestimated Tommy's resistance. After dealing with Tommy, he noticed that Jennifer had woken up and that Casey was already calling for emergency help. At that moment, Jean's plan began to fail. In a hurry, he turned his attention to Casey and Jennifer, believing he had already killed Tommy and Jennifer. He quickly tried to attack Casey, grabbed her purse, and fled with a broken knife. The investigation revealed that Tommy was the one who managed to wear out Jean during a prolonged struggle, although he fought bravely. Tommy sustained severe injuries. Casey played a crucial role in the fight. She managed to bend the knife blade and even knocked it out of Jean's hand. After that, the knife became more difficult to wield. Jennifer also suffered injuries, making her one of the most affected individuals alongside Tommy. Jennifer spent a significant amount of time in the intensive care unit, teetering between life and death, in addition to several stab wounds. She had a punctured lung. Fortunately, both she and Casey miraculously survived. Despite doctors' warning that they were extremely close to death, however, they continued to deal with the aftermath of the traumatic experience. One troubling aspect of the investigation was the apparent indifference of the neighbors. They lived in a quiet suburban area, known for its low crime rate, where there is almost no noise at night. Casey, Tommy, and Jennifer cried out for help, but local residents reported that no one heard their screams, not even the nearby neighbors. This silence allowed Jean to leave the scene of the crime and return home without being noticed. If Casey hadn't managed to call for help, she and Jennifer would have bled to death without any chance of survival. Casey was the youngest person present during the attack, only 17 years old. Despite this, she fought back bravely, suffering many injuries in the process. After that, Gene took his crime knife before running away, leaving Casey behind because she pretended to be dead. What ultimately saved her was a call to emergency services. It is hard to imagine the horrors that would have befallen Casey, and Jennifer had Casey not successfully called for help. At this point, the 911 dispatcher's response raised many concerns, and the public was outraged by his slow reaction due to a poor connection or lack of experience. He had difficulty responding quickly. He repeatedly asked for clarification, revealing his uncertainty. This delay was significant, and a quicker response might have saved Tommy. During the subsequent interrogation, Gene provided more details about that tragic night. He claimed that he had been at home all day and that he was using banned substances, with his last use occurring just before dinner with his family. Then, when he ran out of banned substances, he decided to rob two young neighbors, Casey and Jennifer. For some reason, he was unaware that Tommy lived there permanently and that they had no money. It seemed that he had not planned the crime. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision. Gene was looking for an easy way to get money through theft so he could buy more banned substances. Gene had invaded their home with extreme brutality, shocking the community once again. The incident drew attention, particularly because it involved Gene, an African American, and banned substances. It was a senseless attack on young, promising individuals. Detectives suggested that the motives behind this aggression could include financial gain, a need for intimacy, and possibly envy and hatred towards more successful individuals, specifically attractive young women like Casey and Jennifer. It seemed he aimed to destroy something beautiful. The robbery appeared to be a tactic to lessen his culpability and secure a lighter sentence. However, these were empty justifications, given that the victims included the deceased Tommy and two seriously injured girls, Casey and Jennifer. Consequently, Gene faced charges of attempted murder and first-degree murder at the time of his arrest. He was married and had a son. His family was shocked that he chose a life of crime and banned substances instead of a normal life, ultimately severing ties with him. Nonetheless, they weren't entirely surprised by the incident. This was not his first crime. He had previously committed robberies and engaged with banned substances. However, his earlier criminal behavior had not been as brutally violent due to the overwhelming evidence and Gene's confession. Investigators quickly secured a search warrant for his house. In his room, they found physical evidence. He had not managed to dispose of the items. Forensic experts discovered that these items were soaked in blood. DNA testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Tommy, Casey, and Jennifer. However, by that time, Gene began to retract his statements. He claimed that he was cut by broken glass while taking out the trash in the evening, causing injuries to his arms and legs. To challenge Gene's account, special tests were conducted. It is common for criminals to injure themselves during knife attacks, particularly when the knife strikes a hard surface like a bone. This can cause the hand to slip onto the blade. Gene had cuts that matched the typical injuries seen in such cases. His hands and the knife were covered in blood, and he often displayed aggressive behavior. But at that moment, he was so enraged that he did not feel pain, given that Gene was a suspect from the beginning of the investigation and that sufficient evidence was found against him. Resisting was futile. In addition to the items found in his room, they also discovered a deformed knife blade from a pen that he had taken with him. The strongest evidence against Gene was microscopic blood droplets from Tommy found in his hair. This evidence provided enough reason to file charges. He was arrested just hours after the massacre, leaving him no time to dispose of the evidence. At that time, the crime was punishable by death, a penalty that was abolished in 2011. The defense attorney began to build a case, claiming that Gene was insane, arguing that he was unaware of his actions They pointed to the fact that he did not attempt to destroy any evidence, as the murder knife was discovered in his home, along with other incriminating documents. Additionally, the attorney noted that Gene did not wash off the blood or change his clothes, which could indicate that he was not in a sober state. They also highlighted the numerous cuts on his hands as further evidence of his mental state. The attorney even considered arguing that Gene had attempted to end his life throughout the process. The defense aimed to portray Gene in a more sympathetic light to lessen his punishment. Gene supported this narrative by claiming that he could not remember parts of the attack and attributing his actions to intoxication and the use of a banned substance. The prosecutor's office stated that this violent attack was carried out with extreme cruelty. Gene's actions showed no signs of emotional distress or insanity. He broke into a house and attacked 3 young people, Tommy, Casey, and Jennifer, who posed no threat to him. His actions were completely unjustified. The prosecutor's office also noted that robbery was a factor in the attack, which is indirectly supported by the small amount of stolen items. Gene could have taken more valuable possessions, but only grabbed Casey's purse, which had little money in it, as he fled. Furthermore, they believe Gene targeted the house primarily because he had malicious intentions toward Casey and Jennifer, with Tommy being the main obstacle. However, Gene's testimony changed several times. Leading up to the trial, he eventually claimed that he did not attack Tommy with a knife. Unexpectedly, he stated that Tommy was the one who grabbed the knife and used it against him. Gene insisted that he overpowered Tommy and took the knife during their struggle. He later fell into a state of emotional distress. Furthermore, Gene denied any intention to rob, claiming he had no idea how he ended up in their house. He attributed his confusion to his unstable mental state during the altercation. A knife handle was discovered at the scene. It seems Gene lost it during the struggle, and since he was fleeing in the dark, he didn't have time to retrieve it, leaving his fingerprints on it at that moment. Tommy was not involved with the knife. Gene's actions suggested that his intentions were more malicious than he claimed. He didn't wear a mask and appeared unconcerned about being recognized, likely because he didn't expect anyone else to be in the house. If his goal was merely to steal money, there would have been no reason for him to attack them. Gene confronted Tommy while he was asleep, and there was no indication that Tommy had noticed him or attempted to fight him off. During the trial, a statement from one of the detectives sparked controversy. He praised Tommy for his bravery in confronting Gene, which he claimed saved the lives of Casey and Jennifer. However, this account contradicted the widely accepted version of the incident. According to the detective, Tommy had tried to detain Gene, engaged in a struggle, and attempted to hold him down until the police arrived. Yet, there was no evidence to support this claim. Moreover, even if Tommy had tried, it clearly failed, as Gene managed to injure Casey and Jennifer and escape. Eventually, this version of the incident was dismissed. Surprisingly, Tommy's mother chose not to pursue the death penalty for Gene. Despite having lost her only son, she found the idea of Gene's mother grieving over her child's coffin because of her decision unbearable. Although Gene attempted to show remorse, the jury did not believe him. To avoid the death penalty, he struck a deal with the prosecution. He expressed regret for killing Tommy Smith and stated that he would rather end his life than have caused this pain. He mentioned that if he had known that the banned substance would lead to this, he would never have used it. By pleading guilty to murder and attempted double murder, Gene avoided execution. He was sentenced to life in prison for Tommy's murder, along with an additional 30 years for each of the attacks on Casey and Jennifer, and 15 years for burglary. Gene was incarcerated on January 16, 1992. After the verdict, the lawyer submitted several appeals, suggesting there might be a change in the case. However, these claims were quickly dismissed due to the overwhelming evidence against Gene. He is currently serving his sentence at the Illinois Correctional Center. Casey and Jennifer are still recovering from the incident. They will always carry scars from the injuries inflicted by Jean. The emotional trauma was even more severe. Jennifer struggled for a long time to cope with Tommy's death. But eventually, she found a way to move forward, despite Jean's apologies. Casey and Jennifer could never accept them. They believed that the only appropriate punishment for Jean was execution, as he could not make amends for the harm he caused by killing Tommy, Casey, and Jennifer, who miraculously survived this senseless act of violence, vowed to prevent any attempts by Jean to gain release from prison, given the seriousness of his crimes. It is unlikely that he will ever leave prison after the incident. His wife distanced herself from him, significantly limiting his contact with their child. Hello, everyone. Today we will learn about another case, the case of Gail Clevenger. Our story takes place in DeBerry, a small town in Florida near Orlando. Gail Clevenger, a 46-year-old mother and wife, is one of 6 children in a large family. Growing up in a dysfunctional home, she endured abuse from her parents. Not only did they struggle with alcoholism, but they also neglected their children, often falling into poverty and barely able to provide for the family. Gail had 4 sisters and a brother. Despite the misery and chaos of their home life, they found support in one another. Growing up in an unstable family made her fearless and independent. Gail remained strong, positive, and friendly. The difficulties she faced only strengthened her spirit. Throughout her life, Gail had a passion for art. She played the violin as a child. She dreamed of pursuing her talents in music and art, but quickly realized that achieving her goals would be difficult without her parents' support. As a result, she chose to work in a more practical and profitable field. In 1990, she graduated from high school and enrolled at the University of Miami to study architecture. Gail was highly intelligent, achieving excellent academic results and graduating with honors. As a young and energetic woman, she felt ready to take on any challenge. Although architecture is often seen as a difficult field, especially for women, Gail found her first job within a month and quickly advanced in her career. By the mid-1990s, she was in a serious relationship and had married her boyfriend. Unfortunately, their relationship was troubled from the beginning and soon became abusive. The trauma from her childhood resurfaced, and Gail faced a difficult battle. With the support of close friends, she was able to escape her husband's manipulation. They helped her numerous times and assisted her in obtaining a restraining order. Leaving this abusive marriage was a pivotal moment for her. The only bright spot during this time was the birth of her son, Gregory Logan Ramos, for whom she was able to secure full custody. Gail always hopes to find love and happiness. In the early 2000s, she met Danny, a calm and family-oriented man. She felt that her luck was finally changing and that she could build the loving family she had always dreamed of. Initially cautious, she grew more confident in Danny's suitability as a partner over time. About a year later, they decided to get married. By 2018, Gail was living with Danny, her son Gregory, and Danny's children, who had been abandoned by their biological mother. This new family gave Gregory a brother and a sister. During this period, Gail was thriving at work, but she faced challenges in her personal life, particularly with her biological son, Gregory. From an early age, Gregory exhibited limited social skills. While he had a few friends, he often struggled to fit in, particularly when confronted with new or unfamiliar situations. Worried about your child's condition, Gail wanted to help him develop social confidence. She enrolled him in karate classes, hoping that participating in a sport would boost his self-esteem and help him communicate better with peers. Unfortunately, the relationship between the siblings in the family did not develop as she expected. Gail put in a lot of effort to connect with her son. Many people recognized her as a caring and devoted mother who did everything for him. In her free time from work, she worked hard to create a nurturing environment for his upbringing, one that she had missed out on during her own childhood. She believed it was important for him to focus on his education and career, but her attempts to communicate this seemed to go unheard. At this time, the family lived in a large house where 15-year-old Gregory and his siblings each had their own rooms. Gail felt proud to have achieved her dream of a happy family life. However, not everyone shared her positive outlook. Gregory was in middle school, where he had a small circle of friends, but overall, he struggled to fit into society. His performance in class was average. He didn't stand out in any particular way and lacked enthusiasm for school activities. It seemed that his mother was more invested in his achievements than he was. He rarely met up with friends outside of school and preferred to spend most of his time alone in his room playing video games. His main hobby was gaming, and he also enjoyed listening to loud music late into the night in his room. During this time, he got into many conflicts and fights, attracting the attention of the police. His mother did her best to protect him from trouble and managed to persuade the police to give them a chance to sort things out. A psychologist then worked with Gregory and determined that he had no intelligence or developmental issues. Rather, he was simply too lazy to succeed and achieve his goals. At the age of 15, this situation was further complicated by the difficult transition period Gregory was experiencing. Gail was very concerned about her son's legal issues. She recognized that nothing serious had happened so far, but she feared that if they couldn't get him under control, it could lead to more significant problems. To address this, she tried to redirect Gregory's focus from video games to his studies. The consistent pressure from his mother resulted in improved academic performance. He began to do better in school. However, Gregory disliked any interference in his life and resisted her efforts. At the end of 2018, his grades started to decline again. He struggled with several new topics across different subjects. His mother attempted to explain everything to him, but Gregory stubbornly refused to listen. Gail and her children collaborated to encourage Gregory in his studies. On November 1, 2018, Danny and his children went to visit relatives in another city, leaving Gail alone with Gregory. Despite the lack of support during their discussion about his education, Gail continued to motivate Gregory, hoping to steer him back on track. That evening, she checked his grades and noticed that he was falling below the passing mark. Concerned, she arranged another talk with him, stressing the importance of focusing on his education to earn a good diploma, which would help him get into college and build a future. As usual, the rebellious teenager Gregory listened without displaying much emotion. The next morning, Gregory went to school as usual. He remained quiet and reserved, interacting only with a small group of friends. After school, he returned home around 3 p.m. The emergency services received a worrying call from a boy who identified himself as 15-year-old Gregory Logan Ramos. He reported that upon his return from school, he found the door to his home broken and the interior in disarray. He hesitated to go further inside, worried that an intruder might be hiding there. Gregory had been at school all day and was anxious because his mother's car was in the driveway, yet everything inside was eerily quiet. He feared that his mother might be in trouble. Gregory hadn't seen her and thought she could be at work, possibly borrowing someone else's car or getting a ride from a colleague that morning. However, the broken door and the mess inside raised concerns about his mother's safety. The dispatcher spoke with Gregory to gather more information about the situation, and a patrol car was sent to their home. When the officers arrived, they found Gregory waiting outside, visibly upset. He pointed out the broken door and appeared very distressed. By then, neighbors had noticed the commotion and approached to offer support. Gregory attempted to call his mother several times, but each attempt went unanswered. The police quickly searched the house, but found nothing out of the ordinary. There were no bloodstains or other signs of danger. They assessed the damage inside and concluded that the intruder seemed intent on destruction rather than theft. The officers wondered why the neighbors hadn't heard anything during such a chaotic event, but everyone just shrugged, seemingly indifferent. Gregory believed the robber had entered their home while he was at school. The most concerning issue was the disappearance of Gail. Gregory was extremely anxious, prompting the authorities to take him to a local medical center for evaluation and possible calming medication. The situation was further complicated by the lack of other family members present. Aside from Gail and Gregory, no one else was in the house. Although there were suspicions of revenge from the ex-husband, this theory was quickly ruled out because he had a solid alibi, confirmed by colleagues and surveillance footage showing he was at work. Gregory was deeply affected by the break-in and his mother's disappearance. He was later taken to the police station for a more in-depth discussion, where they hoped he would cooperate. However, Gregory was reluctant to assist. He took considerable time to think through his answers. His initial shock and confusion shifted to focus and anxiety. The officers noticed fresh scratches and bruises on Gregory's body, indicating he had been in some sort of struggle. He also had bruises under his eyes, and his face and hands were badly scraped. When asked about the incident, Gregory mentioned that he had been involved in a fight at school. However, when pressed for details and the names of the boys involved, he struggled to express himself clearly. He failed to mention the names of those who had instigated the conflict, and his responses seemed vague, as if he were making up a story on the spot. Sensing that the police were skeptical of his account, Gregory began to shy away from the topic during the questioning. One detective noticed the inconsistencies in his statements and started to focus on Gregory's body language. As the interrogation continued, Gregory grew increasingly anxious. The officers began to doubt his credibility. Gregory frequently played with his hair, rubbed his leg and arm, covered his eyes with his hand while responding, and crossed his limbs, all of which indicated his discomfort and desire to withdraw from the conversation. The detectives were piecing together the timeline of events from the past 2 days, focusing on the time he had spent alone with his mother at home to determine their next steps. One officer observed that Gregory could recount his morning routine and his return home from school with precise timing, as if he had rehearsed it. Gregory struggled to remember when he had last had dinner or the last time he saw his mother. This indicated that he was trying to focus on the timeline to avoid inconsistencies in his story, but he hadn't considered all the details, which left him unable to answer questions. The detectives were suspicious of Gregory, although his age made them hesitant. As the interrogation continued, one investigator wanted to learn about Gregory's relationship with his mother. Gregory became increasingly anxious. He repeatedly claimed he did not kill his mother, even though no one had asked him about it. He started talking about a group of friends he described as suspicious, suggesting that the police investigate them. By this point, Gregory had changed his story multiple times, and the police were closely monitoring the inconsistencies in his account. They kept pressing him for clarification. Eventually, he felt it was time to tell the truth. Gregory explained that the turning point happened the day before he called for help when he returned home from school. His mother slapped him for getting bad grades. Normally, she didn't react so violently, but this time, she lost control because he had failed biology. He reported that Gail began to hit and insult him. The situation escalated, forcing Gregory to defend himself. During the struggle, he managed to overpower his mother, but accidentally went too far. Realizing what had happened, he panicked and didn't understand his actions. In a state of confusion, he decided to hide his mother's body in a car and drove away to figure out what to do next. After the incident, he experienced a nervous breakdown and had several thoughts of ending his own life, but each time he managed to resist those urges. He wandered through the city and its outskirts until he discovered a quiet spot. There, he noticed a large blackened area from a campfire and started to dig. After digging a hole, Gregory pulled his mother's body out of the car and placed it in a shallow grave. He attempted to remove her wedding ring to sell it, but it wouldn't come off. Frustrated, he even tried cutting off her finger, but only injured it. Eventually, he left everything as it was, covered the hole with dirt and leaves, and went home, as if nothing had happened. Feeling very tired, he planned to rest and go to school the next morning. His behavior was so calm that none of his classmates noticed anything unusual when they were questioned later. However, Gregory's troubles didn't end there. After returning home, he realized that his mother's sudden disappearance would raise suspicions. So, before school, he decided to fake a break-in and robbery. He planned to call the police when he got back. As he began his act in the morning, he found it too noisy and cumbersome to do alone, so he thought about recruiting his friends. According to the police, he successfully staged the break-in, aided by his knowledge of forensics, which he had gained from attending a related club. Gregory's friends, Dylan Seglerek and Brian Porras, drove over in the morning to pick him up for school. And on the way, Gregory made several significant mistakes. First, he couldn't keep quiet about his crime. He openly told his friends, Dylan and Brian, that he had killed his mother, even showing some pride in his confession. Gregory also asked his classmates to help him stage the crime scene. However, they thought it was a joke and were more interested in exploring someone else's house. After school, the group planned to search through Gregory's house. They skipped their last class and went to his house. Inside, there was no trace of his mother's body, but the house was a mess. The state of the house was a result of the three teenagers joyfully destroying everything after Gregory had let them. Meanwhile, the police noticed that some items were untouched. These belonged to Gregory and included a hunting rifle from his father, a hunting bow, a gaming computer, and other valuable possessions. After trashing the house, his friends wished him luck and left. However, their plan was not yet finished. Gregory contacted the police and pretended to be a scared son during the investigation. Some of Gail's belongings were found with Dylan, leading to his confession. It was more challenging to get a confession from Brian, who adamantly denied his involvement in the destruction. With the assistance of his friends, a timeline of events was reconstructed and verified by Gregory. It was clear that the act was carefully planned. It appeared to be premeditated murder rather than self-defense. By that time, many people who knew the Clevenger family had been interviewed, and they confirmed that Gregory had always been a troublemaker. They were not surprised that Gregory was capable of such an act. Despite the gravity of the situation, all three detainees were joking and having fun in the police station, unaware of the seriousness of their circumstances. Dylan and Brian might have expected a less severe consequence than a murder charge, but it was crucial to determine their actual involvement in the crime. After being questioned, all three individuals were taken to the Juvenile Justice Department and held in detention. Gail's body was found exactly where it had been indicated. Gregory had attempted to hide the grave, but did so carelessly, leaving part of her leg visible above the ground. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was strangulation. On November 4, 2018, 15-year-old Gregory Ramos was charged with first-degree murder of his mother, improper handling of a body, and tampering with evidence to avoid punishment. The hearings were filled with emotion. Gregory cried frequently and offered apologies to everyone present. Many felt that he did not genuinely regret his actions, but was instead trying to reduce his culpability. His family attended the courtroom. They were shocked by the events. Danny and his children were struggling to cope with Gail's death, as they had all loved her deeply. Several statements were made during the hearings. Gregory asked for mercy for his friends Brian and Dylan, insisting they were not involved in the crime. He repeated this claim, but the prosecution focused solely on the facts, continuing the investigation. According to Gregory, he and his friends were unaware of the full extent of the crime, and his friends did not believe that his mother had been murdered. When he realized the severity of the situation, he tried to make light of it, fabricating a story to explain why chaos ensued at home. Considering Gregory's age, he had a good chance of being acquitted or receiving a very light sentence. To reach a compromise, the prosecution proposed a plea deal. Because he was a minor, Gregory was not facing the death penalty, but if he confessed, he could avoid life imprisonment. Gregory accepted the deal and explained that he had an argument with his mother over a bad grade that evening. He did not argue back. Instead, he went to his room, slammed the door, and tried to sleep, but he couldn't. While Gregory was trying to sleep in his room, Gail called her husband, who was out of town, visiting relatives with their children. She told him about the argument with Gregory, and he reassured her, promising to come back in a couple of days to address the situation. The hurtful words his mother had said during the argument kept playing in Gregory's mind. Eventually, he left his room and confronted his mother again, and the argument escalated. In a moment of rage, Gregory attacked her, strangling her with his bare hands for about half an hour until she stopped breathing. It's important to note that during that time, he could have chosen to calm down and stop, making it difficult to classify his actions as unintentional. The court sentenced Gregory to 45 years in prison, allowing for parole after 25 years. He would also be on probation for the rest of his life. Although Gregory sought a lighter sentence, his friends faced difficulties. They were threatened with up to 30 years in prison following preliminary hearings. Their bail was denied. Gregory's history of mental illness, which raised concerns about the risk of self-harm or flight. Dylan was held without bail for 309 days, with bail set at $200,000, a sum beyond his family's financial means. By February 8, 2021, he had spent 828 days in the county jail and had not yet pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting the murder, leaving a jury trial pending. During the hearings, the prosecution lacked sufficient evidence to prove Dylan's involvement, leading the judge to propose a compromise. Ultimately, Dylan was sentenced to 10 years of probation. Brian experienced the least hardship. After preliminary hearings, he was allowed to post bail of $100,000. He faced standard restrictions during the investigation, but was able to complete his schooling and enroll in college without violating any conditions. On July 8, 2021, Brian appeared in court. His lawyers argued that over the 3 years he spent free, he had demonstrated that he was a responsible member of society and posed no threat to anyone. On the other side, Gail's family, including Danny and his children, believed that Brian, as a co-conspirator in the violent act, should serve at least 828 days in prison, just like his friend Dylan. They argued that he should receive the same punishment, followed by 10 years of probation. Brian's lawyer attempted to persuade the jurors that Brian had become a victim of his friend's poor choices and lack of judgment. Although Brian was involved in the incident, his age limited his understanding of the situation. Meanwhile, the prosecution maintained that he deserved punishment. They pointed out that Brian failed to report the incident to the police, despite being aware of his friend's confession about the murder of his mother. The defense countered by stating that neither Dylan nor Brian truly believed Gregory's claims. Ultimately, Brian was given a conditional sentence. Danny believes that Gregory's accomplices should have faced harsher penalties. He and others think they assisted Gregory in digging a grave and hiding his mother's body. This suggests that Gregory recruited his friends not just for the attack, but also for the burial. However, eventually, Danny stated that he had forgiven the teenagers, as he realized that no amount of anger or desire for revenge would bring his wife back. He chose to move on from the situation. Before the summer of 1988, the Carr family enjoyed a happy life in the small town of Alturas. They were known for their strong faith and attended church every Sunday, embodying a peaceful, trouble-free family. However, their calm life was disrupted on June 14th, when 17-year-old Dwayne found a threatening letter in their mailbox. The anonymous note was alarming, warning the family to leave Florida or face serious consequences. Distressed, Dwayne quickly showed the letter to his parents. His mother, Peggy, was filled with fear, while his father, Pi, dismissed it as a prank. As summer transitioned into fall,
the family's anxiety increased, peaking on October 23rd when Peggy suddenly became seriously ill. She suffered from intense nausea and severe pain, and strikingly, her hair began to fall out in large clumps. Despite her worsening condition, Pi insisted on not taking Peggy to the hospital, thinking it was just a temporary illness. However, Peggy's health rapidly deteriorated, and within a week, she fell into a coma. To make matters worse, Dwayne started showing the same troubling symptoms as his mother. This alarming situation led to a police investigation. On December 2nd, authorities made a shocking discovery. The sickness affecting the Carr family was caused by thallium, a deadly chemical often used in rat poison. Tests revealed that every family member, including Pi, had dangerously high levels of this poison in their bodies. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that someone was deliberately targeting the Carr family. The letter they received was not a joke. It was a warning of the danger ahead. Authorities now had to work quickly to identify the person responsible and prevent further harm. Turn back time. In 1988, Dwayne was happily living with his family in the peaceful town of Alturas, Florida. His mother, Peggy, worked hard as a waitress at a local diner. After raising 3 children by herself, she found love with Pi Carr, who had 2 children of his own, creating a blended family. Life in Alturas seemed perfect. It was a quiet place where people left their doors unlocked, ideal for raising a family. However, on October 23rd, everything changed in a tragic way. Early in the morning, Peggy went to work as usual. However, shortly after arriving at the diner, she began experiencing a burning sensation in her legs and feet, followed by severe chest pain. She was quickly taken to the hospital, where her condition left her nearly incapacitated. Despite extensive tests, doctors were unable to determine the cause of her symptoms and sent her home with pain relief medication. A week later, on October 30th, Peggy and Dwayne, along with Dwayne's stepbrother, Travis, were taken to the hospital with severe symptoms. The pain was so intense that they were brought to tears, and they were scared for their lives. Peggy was admitted to the intensive care unit, where an infectious disease specialist noticed something troubling, suggesting possible poisoning. He decided to test for thallium, a toxic substance banned in the U.S. since 1972, but still found in some old rat poisons. The test results were shocking. Peggy had 50 times the deadly amount of thallium in her body. The following day, October 31st, she fell into a coma. Travis needed a respirator, and Dwayne showed no signs of getting better. The police quickly started an investigation with a clear goal: to identify the source of the poisoning and prevent more harm. They searched the orange groves, tested the neighborhood's water supply, and even investigated the diner where Peggy worked, but found no signs of thallium. As news broke, panic spread through the community. Concerned citizens demanded answers, anxious about their safety. Investigators arrived at the Carr home, carefully collecting dust samples and over 400 household items for testing. One item of particular concern was a 6-pack of Coke bottles, 3 of which were unopened. Tests showed that each bottle contained more than a gram of thallium, enough to be lethal to an adult. The lead detective understood that there were 2 possible explanations. Either the Coke had been tampered with at the factory, or it had been contaminated elsewhere. If it was factory tampering, many more people might have consumed the poison, potentially affecting not just the county, but the entire state or even the nation. This fear led locals to hesitate before drinking Coke. The investigation initially targeted the bottling company. However, thanks to Coca-Cola's cooperation, it was quickly determined that large-scale tampering was not possible. It was found that tampering with the product at the plant could not physically happen. As a result, the police concluded that this was a deliberate attack on Peggy Carr and her family. The investigation focused on family members, with Peggy's husband, Pi Carr, becoming a key suspect. Although they had been married for just 7 months, their initial happiness had faded quickly. Pi spent long hours working at the mine, which made Peggy increasingly suspicious of him. One night, she caught him with another woman, further deepening her concerns. During the weekend that Peggy became ill, Pi happened to be out of town. When he returned, he was reluctant to take her to the hospital. As investigators looked further into Pi's past, they tried to find a reason why he would poison his wife. However, one question continued to trouble the police. Why would Pi also poison his own son, Travis? During the interrogation, Pi shared an intriguing piece of information. On June 14th, 4 months before Peggy got sick, Dwayne discovered a letter in the mailbox. Inside, there was a yellow post-it note with a typewritten warning telling the family to leave Florida within 2 weeks or they would face death. At first, Dwayne and his siblings found it funny, but now Pi's lack of concern appeared more suspicious. The police discovered that unsettling events had previously occurred in the Carr household. A few years earlier, 2 of their dogs had died unexpectedly, showing signs of severe illness and hair loss. This raised a disturbing possibility that they might have been subjected to experimentation. As Peggy's condition worsened, Dwayne and Travis showed no signs of getting better. The entire family was tested for thallium. The results were shocking. Every family member, including Pi Carr, had trace amounts of thallium in their system. This finding ruled Pi out as a suspect, since it seemed unlikely that someone would commit such a crime while also risking their own exposure to the poison. Even Peggy's 2-year-old granddaughter, Casey, had traces of thallium. On March 3, 1989, after 5 months of suffering, Peggy's health took a tragic turn for the worse. Dwayne was summoned to her bedside one last time as the family made the painful decision to take her off life support. Peggy Carr passed away at the age of 41, leaving her family in deep sorrow. Peggy's death shifted the investigation to a murder case. Poisoning is an unusual and deliberate method of killing, typically associated with a particularly clever and disturbed individual. When the FBI examined the contaminated Coke bottles, they discovered tiny scratch marks, suggesting that the bottles had been carefully altered. Thallium had been added, the caps resealed, and the bottles looked untouched. Since thallium is both tasteless and odorless, it dissolves easily without leaving typical signs like overflow, discoloration, or sediment in soda. The careful mixture found in the Coke bottles indicates that the perpetrator possessed advanced chemistry knowledge, an exceptionally intelligent person who thought they were more cunning than everyone else. Police began to interview neighbors and townspeople in Alturas, a small community with only a few hundred residents, as they searched for the person responsible for this terrible crime. The closest neighbors to the Carr family were George James Trepal and his wife, Diana. When detectives questioned Trepal, he reacted with surprising anger, criticizing the redneck children and family living nearby. When asked who anyone would want to harm the Carr family, George gave a disturbingly detailed answer. He believed someone wanted them to move away. This was exactly the same message found in a threatening letter sent to the Carrs, a detail known only to the police. This unusual response led investigators to consider Trepal as a prime suspect. Further investigation revealed that George was a self-taught chemist, while his wife, Diana, held a master's degree in chemistry. Both were part of an elite society for individuals with an IQ in the top 2% of the population. Investigators then uncovered George's criminal history. He had previously served time in prison for his role as the chemist in a large methamphetamine operation. One key ingredient used in making methamphetamine is thallium. The news that George was a person of interest surprised even Peggy's son, Dwayne, who found it hard to believe that Trepal was capable of such a terrible crime. The detectives found out that Trepal had a prior altercation with the Carr family over loud music. Just 2 days after this dispute, Peggy Carr was poisoned. Although there were connections between the two events, the police did not have sufficient evidence to arrest Trepal. Typically, police procedures involve questioning a suspect in hopes of securing a confession. However, detectives felt this tactic would not be effective with Trepal, who is introverted and avoids confrontation. Therefore, the FBI suggested an alternative approach. Someone needed to go undercover to outwit Trepal. the police assigned Special Agent to go undercover in the group that George Treppel was part of. The goal was to earn Treppel's trust and collect enough evidence to demonstrate his involvement in the poisoning. At first, it appeared that the agent would only need to work undercover for a weekend. However, she was cautioned about Treppel's exceptional memory. If he saw her, he might remember her face or car. She, using a fake identity, was getting ready to attend a murder mystery event organized by George Treppel and his wife, Diana. She pretended to be a woman about to divorce her abusive husband. On April 14, 1989, she arrived at the local hotel where the gathering was taking place. As she entered, she was met by George himself. Seeing him, she felt anxious that he might recognize her from previous surveillance. She took a deep breath and looked for any indication that he knew her, but Treppel didn't seem to remember her. Still, she had to stay alert in her undercover role. She understood that Treppel was not likely to confront someone directly. He preferred to poison his victims, leading to a slow and painful death. The agent signed up for the event and received a packet with all the weekend details prepared by Treppel himself. The pamphlet outlined several carefully crafted murder scenarios, including one that involved poisoning. One paragraph caught her attention. It stated that when a death threat arrives, cautious individuals should discard all their food and be mindful of what they consume. This alarming similarity reminded she of the death threat the Carr family had received just before Peggy was poisoned, reinforcing her belief that they had identified the right suspect. Throughout the weekend, the agent spoke with Treppel, carefully monitoring his every word, aware that any mistake could cost her life. When Treppel inquired about her background, she fabricated a story about her husband, a lawyer from Houston, Texas, whom she claimed to have left. Treppel revealed that he could detect lies by observing the movement of a person's neck muscles, which made she even more anxious. Before the weekend concluded, she revealed to Treppel her plan to move to Florida in order to escape her husband. This confession led to an important development. Treppel mentioned that he and his wife were considering relocating their practice and selling their house. After meeting with her supervisors, the agent was told to extend her undercover operation beyond the original weekend. She recognized this as an opportunity to gather important evidence that could lead to a search warrant for Treppel's house. Her goal was to find lab equipment or chemicals that would connect Treppel to the crime. The next week, she visited Treppel's house. During the visit, Treppel bragged about how safe Alturas was and how nobody locked their doors. While she spotted several suspicious items, such as a secret passage in the library and a mannequin dressed in bondage gear, none of these were enough to obtain a search warrant. Despite her failed plan, the agent continued to act, committed to collecting more evidence. She understood the dangers involved. Revealing her real identity could put her and her family at risk. Treppel, who was very clever, might resort to poisoning her if he found out she was an undercover detective. Over the next few months, she met with Treppel for several lunch dates, always being watched closely. She avoided eating or drinking anything after leaving the table, cautious of Treppel's potential to harm her. During these meetings, Treppel progressively showed his contempt for those he deemed less intelligent, which provided she with a glimpse into his mindset. After 8 months, the agent had gathered many small pieces of evidence, but it wasn't enough to form a strong case. Her supervisors started to doubt the operation's worth and considered shutting it down. For the agent, giving up was not an option. She felt a deep responsibility to seek justice for Peggy Carr and her family, thinking about how it could have been her own loved ones who ingested the poison. In December 1989, the agent received an important call she had been anticipating. George and Diana Treppel had relocated and offered her the opportunity to move into their home. With this offer, the agent gained legal permission to enter the house without needing a warrant, allowing her to invite the county crime scene unit to conduct an investigation. Suspecting that Treppel was too intelligent to leave obvious signs of thallium, the investigation team concentrated on searching for residues in areas such as the air conditioning filter and drains. The house still contained many of Treppel's belongings, which provided plenty of chances to collect samples. In the garage, investigators found vials and chemistry bottles, hoping that one of them would test positive for thallium. While waiting for results from the FBI lab, the agent struggling to come up with new ways to engage Treppel. As time passed, she realized that by January 1990, with no updates from the lab, she needed to take matters into her own hands. She aimed to trick Treppel into incriminating himself, not knowing that he was preparing his own deception. The agent scheduled a meeting with Treppel at a picnic area behind a McDonald's, near where he lived. This important meeting was recorded. During their discussion, she gave Treppel a business card that she claimed had been left by detectives looking for him. Treppel reacted noticeably. He became very anxious and visibly unsettled as he tried to stay calm. He repeatedly invited she to visit his new house, but she declined. The atmosphere was tense, leaving one to wonder what would have happened if she had accepted his invitation. After the meeting, Treppel appeared visibly shaken and deeply impacted by the news from her. This marked a critical moment in the investigation. On April 4, 1990, the agent received an unexpected phone call. The FBI had found thallium in one of the vials taken from Treppel's garage. The vial contained thallium nitrate, the same chemical used to poison Peggy Carr and to try to kill her entire family. This discovery provided crucial evidence to bolster the case against Treppel. On April 5th, George Treppel was arrested at his new home in Seguin. Seeing him led into the county jail in an orange jumpsuit marked the conclusion of a lengthy and dangerous investigation. Even when the agent revealed her true identity, Treppel remained calm. The special agent from the county sheriff's office presented him with a warrant for handwriting samples, to which Treppel simply smiled and said, "Oh, okay." She had narrowly escaped becoming Treppel's next victim. In January 1991, George Treppel's trial began with substantial evidence against him. Police found a journal in Treppel's home called General Poisoning Guides, which identified thallium as a common poison used by criminals. The journal included references to harming neighbors, and 55 fingerprints found in it matched Treppel's. The prosecution also presented the tools used to tamper with the Coke bottles, including a set of tiny screwdrivers. One screwdriver was missing and fit perfectly with the marks on the bottle caps, which was incriminating evidence that shocked the jury. Throughout the trial, Treppel maintained a calm and emotionless demeanor, even smiling at times. His lack of remorse and his premeditated actions revealed a disturbing level of malice. He rationalized his cruel actions by claiming he was more intelligent than others and believed that those he deemed less intelligent did not have the right to live. The trial lasted for 2 months, but the jury took only 4 hours to reach a decision. On March 6, 1991, nearly 2 years after Peggy Carr's death, George Treppel was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death. According to the Florida Department of Corrections, inmates on death row wait an average of 12.7 years for execution. Treppel passed that milestone nearly 8 years ago. With this verdict, justice was served for Peggy Carr. The special agent's unwavering dedication and bravery played a crucial role in bringing this criminal to justice. She put her life at risk to ensure that Treppel was held accountable for his horrific actions. Reflecting on her commitment, one can't help but admire her courage. She went above and beyond to ensure that Peggy's killer faced justice, earning the respect and gratitude of many. The other members of Peggy Carr's family, who also experienced poisoning, fully recovered. However, the loss of Peggy deeply affected her son Dwayne. Losing his mother at just 16 years old was a traumatic event that left him with lasting emotional pain. In the years after her passing, Dwayne struggled with his grief, frequently expressing it through anger and emotional outbursts. Eventually, he discovered comfort in writing letters to his mother, where he shared his feelings. He promised to work on improving his life. Dwayne fulfilled his promise. Today, he is married and is the supportive father his family needs. Each day, he works hard to make his mother proud and honor her memory. Dwayne exemplifies the strength of the human spirit, proving that even after facing great tragedy, it is possible to live a meaningful life. Harold entered the house with a friendly smile, listened to concerns, provided an injection, and then left. A few hours later, the patient would die. No one imagined that this calm, tidy doctor wearing glasses was secretly waging a personal war against life. He appeared trustworthy, a caring figure, and a support for the elderly in a British suburb. However, he was actually the deadliest serial killer in British history, using his medical profession as a cover for the cold-blooded murder of hundreds of innocent people. Harold Frederick Shipman was born on January 14, 1946, in a working-class neighborhood of Nottingham. His family represented the typical post-war British household. His father was a truck dispatcher, and his mother was a homemaker. However, it was his mother, Vera Shipman, who greatly influenced his life. She was strict and intensely religious, and Harold was her favorite child, receiving much more attention than his siblings. This close relationship with his mother significantly shaped his personality, fostering his need for control and a sense of being special. When Harold turned 17, his mother became seriously ill with lung cancer. He watched her health decline day by day. Harold was by her side, helping out by bringing food, running errands, and holding her hand. He witnessed a once strong, commanding woman become a frail version of herself. One particular moment stayed with him, when the doctor gave his mother a morphine injection. Within minutes, she fell asleep, never woke up. That image stuck in Harold's mind. The doctor, with just one injection, ended her suffering, held complete control over her life. Harold began to associate medicine and morphine with a dangerous kind of power. Death of his mother marked a crucial change in Harold's life. The next year, he started medical school in Leeds. Although he was intelligent, hard-working, he was also shy and chose not to socialize much. His motivation for studying medicine was not driven by a love for biology or a desire to help others. Instead, he sought a profession where he could manage pain, death, and control over lives, a field where people would admire him, much like how his mother admired her doctor. In 1970, he graduated and obtained his medical license. He was young, polite, reserved, and highly disciplined. This was the Harold Shipman who appeared at clinics and hospitals. He wore glasses, maintained a neat appearance, spoke to patients in a calm yet confident manner. While many of his colleagues viewed him as unexciting but dependable, inside him, a troubling idea was developing, one that would eventually turn into a dangerous obsession. Early in his career, he worked at Pontefract General Infirmary and later at a hospital in Todmorden. It was at this location that his troubling behavior first appeared. He was discovered forging prescriptions for morphine, and with an unusually large supply of painkillers, much more than would be required for a large ward. As a result, he was arrested, confessed to his crimes, and received a suspended sentence. Despite this, he continued to practice medicine. The system allowed him a second chance, which he exploited to carry out a series of heinous acts in secret. After receiving a suspended sentence for forging prescriptions, Harold was eager to make a fresh start. In 1977, he relocated to Hyde, a small town in Greater Manchester, where he joined the Donnybrook medical practice. There, he began to shape himself into the ideal family doctor, one who patients could rely on for all aspects of their health, including pain management and end-of-life care. Patients adored Dr. Shipman. He was always polite, attentive, and respectful of their time. Elderly women in particular felt a strong connection to him. He listened carefully, didn't rush them, and never pressured them into unnecessary treatments. He made it a point to visit patients at their homes, especially those unable to travel to the clinic. These home visits became a hallmark of his practice. He would arrive, administer an injection, and then be on his way. Shortly after his visits, however, many of these patients would pass away. To the police and death registrars, he seemed like an ideal doctor. He completed death certificates himself, citing causes such as old age or heart failure, and frequently sent bodies to the crematorium without conducting autopsies. His reputation was so strong that no one doubted his records. If he declared a death to be natural, it was accepted without hesitation. People failed to notice that the death rate among his patients was significantly higher than that of his peers in the region. If they did notice, they attributed it to coincidence or characteristics of his patient group. He was punctual, detail-oriented, and excessively meticulous. He lived with his wife, Primrose, and their 4 children, following a rigid daily schedule similar to a military routine. Each night, he recorded new cases of death in his medical logs. There was no emotion involved. Everything was exact and clinical, resembling an accounting report. His method of killing was straightforward. He would visit elderly patients, primarily those living alone, and administer an intravenous injection. Most of the time, this involved a lethal dose of morphine or another potent opioid delivered quickly. The patient would lose consciousness and die within 15 minutes. Shipman would then calmly conclude his visit, leave the house, and fill out the necessary paperwork. Time of death, symptoms, no witnesses. Everything was meticulously managed. His actions lacked rage or chaos. They resembled a ritual. He didn't merely kill, he carefully orchestrated each event. He determined who would live and who would die. This might have been his warped way of dealing with his mother's death, possibly viewing himself as a savior from pain. Later, psychologists suggested that he felt a sense of godlike power from it. He took on the roles of judge and executioner. Over time, he became so confident that he stopped concealing his unusual actions. Sometimes, patients died one after another in the same day, all attended by the same doctor, with the same natural cause, and no one suspected anything. Starting in the late 1980s, the death rate among Harold Shipman's elderly patients began to increase, but no one recognized the serious pattern. The victims were primarily women, over 70, often widows who lived alone, but they were not always weak. Most were still vibrant and active. They died suddenly, without apparent suffering or signs of struggle. He was never rushed. He would visit a patient's home, administer an injection, wait a bit while observing their breathing slow, and only then would he look into their lifeless eyes, stand up, remove his gloves, adjust his tie, and leave. Relatives would learn of the death afterward, and when they received the medical report indicating a natural cause, there was no reason or legal basis to call for an investigation. Even in a well-designed system, problems can arise. In 1993, colleagues started to suspect that the number of deaths among patients under Shipman's care was unusually high, especially since he had seen many of them just hours before they died. An internal investigation was launched, but because Shipman was a meticulous doctor with all his paperwork in perfect order, and there was no national database to compare mortality rates between doctors at that time, the investigation was closed. Shipman realized he could act without fear of consequences and became more brazen. He not only killed patients, but also began forging their wills. In several cases, he either persuaded elderly women to change their wills in his favor or forged them himself. His aim was straightforward. He wanted their inheritances. In one instance, he misled a patient into thinking he was helping her with medical forms, while in reality, he gave her documents that transferred her property to him. By 1998, over 200 patients had died, yet the system remained oblivious. He was still seen as trustworthy. Bureaucracy failed to connect the evidence, and families found it hard to believe that their beloved doctor could be a monster. The situation changed dramatically after the death of Kathleen Grundy, 81, a vibrant widow who was engaged in her community. She was energetic and preparing for a trip with her daughter when she unexpectedly passed away at home. Just one day after Dr. Shipman's visit, what should have been a routine case turned into a serious error for him, leading to his ultimate downfall. On June 24, 1998, Kathleen unexpectedly passed away at home after a visit from her doctor, Harold Shipman. She had been feeling well, just returned from shopping, was planning a trip with her daughter, and was getting ready to celebrate her wedding anniversary. However, a few hours after the doctor's visit, she stopped responding to phone calls. Neighbors eventually discovered her body slumped in an armchair, holding a book. It appeared she had just fallen asleep. Harold Shipman wasted no time filling out her death certificate, attributing her death to old age and a heart condition. No autopsy was conducted because her family trusted the doctor, and the system relied on his professional judgment. Everything seemed ideal, except for one critical issue. Kathleen had a daughter named Angela Woodruff, who was skeptical of coincidences. Angela, being a lawyer, was familiar with how a properly drafted will should appear. When she received a copy of her mother's last will, she was shocked. The document stated that Kathleen left her entire estate, valued at over £300,000, not to her daughter or grandchildren, but to Dr. Harold Shipman. Moreover, the will lacked a date. Any witness signatures and Kathleen's signature appeared strange, as if it had been copied. Angela was determined to get to the bottom of things. She first asked the notary if he had ever managed Kathleen's affairs. He answered that he had never created a will for him and mentioned that he had an official copy of Kathleen's will, which had been prepared years prior. This original will clearly divided her estate among her family, directly contradicting the new will. Angela then approached the police, which marked the beginning of the unraveling of Harold Shipman's mistakes. He believed that no one would challenge him, that no detective would investigate further, and that he was beyond reach. However, the inspectors decided to open an investigation. The first issue noticed was that Kathleen's death certificate was filled out incorrectly. Next, there were inconsistencies in her medical records. While the doctor reported heart problems, her family insisted she had shown no symptoms. Additionally, the pharmacy where Shipman allegedly ordered her medications confirmed that there were no prescriptions under her name. This led the police to request an exhumation of her body. During the investigation, experts discovered high levels of diamorphine, a type of medical morphine usually prescribed for extreme pain in hospice patients, in Kathleen's tissues. However, she did not have any condition that would require such medication. The amount of morphine found was enough to be lethal for someone of her age and size. Experts determined that Kathleen Grundy's will was forged by comparing her signature on the new document to her signatures on older ones. They concluded she did not write it, and her computer showed no evidence of changes to the will. All signs indicated that Dr. Shipman had forged the document to steal money from a deceased woman. The combination of one deceased woman, her daughter, and the forged will revealed a dark and deadly chapter in British medical history. Following the alarming toxicology findings, the Manchester police recognized that this was not a one-time incident. They started to examine all the death certificates that Dr. Harold Shipman had signed over the years. As their investigation progressed, they became increasingly disturbed. They began to uncover a network of deaths connected to one individual, the esteemed Dr. Harold Shipman. The forensic team carefully examined the medical records of over 500 patients who had died after being treated by Dr. Shipman. They focused especially on elderly women who passed away at home and were cremated without autopsies. They paid close attention to cases where Dr. Shipman was the last person to see the patient alive, wrote the death certificate, and discouraged family members from requesting autopsies. These cases were quite common. To verify their suspicions, the police exhumed several bodies. In each case, tests found high levels of diamorphine and pure morphine at dangerously high doses. This was Shipman's method. He used this drug to make deaths appear natural. He could administer it during a home visit and later list the cause of death as a heart attack, respiratory failure, or general decline in health. Investigators were shocked by the extent of the situation. Almost every case appeared suspicious. In some areas where Shipman worked, more patients died in just a few years than in the entire rest of the city combined. None had reported a sudden decline in health before he arrived. Shipman specifically targeted patients who lived alone to eliminate witnesses. Another disturbing fact came to light. Harold Shipman kept killing until the day before his arrest. Even while the investigation was happening, he still visited patients, examined them, smiled, gave injections, and recorded deaths, despite the exhumation of Kathleen Grundy's body. As the case evolved, the police had to enlist more than a dozen forensic experts, toxicologists, criminologists, and psychologists to understand his motives, but nothing logical emerged. Shipman gained little from most of the murders, with only a few instances where he forged wills. Most of his victims left him nothing. Psychologists proposed that Shipman exhibited traits of both addiction and megalomania. He assumed the role of God, determining who should die and turning death into a routine act of murder. When the number of victims reached 215, the British media reacted with disbelief. It was shocking to discover that a well-respected family doctor, who was a father of 4 and had spent decades serving his community, turned out to be a cold-blooded serial killer. He may be the deadliest killer in British history, and possibly even in human history. The trial of Harold Shipman started on October 5, 1999, at Preston Crown Court, known for being one of the most secure buildings in England. The case attracted widespread media attention, with journalists from around the world covering the hearings daily, while families of the victims filled the courtroom. Sitting in the defendant's chair was an elderly man who appeared calm, with gray hair and a cold expression. He looked just like he did during his numerous visits to patients, composed, reserved, and confident. However, this time, he was not facing an elderly patient, but an entire nation. The prosecution charged him with 15 murder counts, supported by strong evidence, including exhumations, toxicology reports, forged wills, and inconsistencies in medical records. Yet, it was widely believed that this represented only a fraction of his crimes, with investigators estimating that the real number of victims exceeded 200. It was impossible to prove each murder with absolute certainty because many bodies had been cremated and there was insufficient evidence remaining. During the court proceedings, prosecutors listed the names of the women who had passed away in their sleep, found in various locations like next to a couch, in the kitchen, and in a rocking chair. The relatives of the victims were visibly upset and crying, while Shipman remained expressionless throughout the reading, showing no signs of remorse or emotion. A pivotal moment in the investigation was the case of Kathleen Grundy. Evidence was presented in court showing that her will had been forged, which included handwriting analysis and testimonies from her daughter, pharmacists, and neighbors. Another tragic incident involved 59-year-old Jean Lilly. Her grandson shared that on the morning of her death, she was baking an apple pie for him. Just 2 hours later, the doctor called to inform him of her passing, claiming she had died peacefully of old age. However, tests later revealed that she had actually died from a morphine overdose administered by Shipman. He had contacted the funeral service himself and insisted on her immediate cremation. Psychiatrists involved in the case attempted to analyze his behavior. One described Shipman as a pathological narcissist who believed he was all-powerful. The defense attempted to question the exhumation methods and toxicology reports, but the evidence against Dr. Shipman was substantial. Numerous witnesses, including former colleagues, nurses, and victims' relatives, provided testimony. They all shared a consistent view. Dr. Shipman appeared to be perfect, and no one suspected that a monster was hidden behind his calm demeanor. On January 31, 2000, after 6 months of hearings, the jury found Harold Shipman guilty of all 15 murder charges and 1 count of forging a will. The judge sentenced him to 15 life sentences without the possibility of parole, a symbolic punishment since it was widely believed that he could have killed as many as more than 200 people. This verdict addressed not only Shipman, but also the system that allowed him to cause destruction for decades. The courtroom erupted in applause and tears. Even at the end of the trial, Harold remained upright and expressionless, almost as if the trial did not concern him. He did not apologize, provide explanations, or display any emotion. To many, he was seen not as a human being, but as a heartless machine of death. After the verdict, Harold Shipman was sent to Wakefield Prison, one of the UK's most secure facilities, known for housing the most dangerous criminals. He was monitored around the clock, but maintained the same demeanor in his cell as he had outside, withdrawn, silent, and detached. He avoided interactions, declined rehabilitation programs, refused to give interviews, and completely evaded questions about his crimes. He understood that he would be remembered in history. His name would forever be associated with a staggering number, 215-250, or perhaps even more figures that designated him as the deadliest serial killer in recorded history. He did not want his story to conclude on anyone else's terms. On January 13, 2004, the day before he turned 58, Harold Shipman was discovered dead in his cell. He had hanged himself using a bedsheet tied to the window bars. Unfortunately, no one was able to stop him. He exited life as he had taken it, quietly, without saying a word or providing any explanation. He left no suicide note, confession, or reasons. All that remained was silence. Nanette Krentel grew up in New Orleans in a humble, close-knit family. Her parents, Dan and Pat Watson, raised her along with her siblings Kim, Eliza, and 3 half-siblings, and taught her important values of loyalty and kindness, known for her gentle and caring nature. Nanette had a deep love for animals and shared her home with 2 cats and a dog. Despite moving away, she maintained a close bond with her family, especially her father and sisters, speaking with them daily. In 1994, at 27 years old, Nanette met Steve Krentel while applying for a job at his office supply store. Steve, then 28, owned both a scuba gear business and the store, and was going through a divorce at the time. Their professional relationship soon turned romantic, and after Steve finalized his divorce, he introduced Nanette to his young son, Justin. By 1995, they were married. Steve's native of Louisiana. He grew up near Lacombe and reportedly had a tense relationship with his brother, Brian. In 2000, Steve and Nanette moved to Lacombe, closer to his parents. He gradually worked his way up in the Tammany Parish Fire Department, eventually becoming the fire chief. Respected for his professionalism, his career in the fire department provided him with financial security and influence in the community. In 1997, after Steve sold both of his businesses, Nanette shifted her career path. She began working at a daycare center, where her kind and attentive nature earned the trust of parents and co-workers. Beyond her job, she became involved in the community, organizing fundraisers and charitable events, as well as supporting local fire departments by selling handmade ceramics and baked goods. By 2017, she had been out of the workforce for several years, focusing instead on her home, her pets, and continued community involvement. Although she had no children, Nanette was always concerned and attentive to the lives of her loved ones. She often played a central role in family matters, offering emotional and financial support to her loved ones. To outsiders, she and Steve seemed to lead a peaceful life, residing on 100 acres of scenic remote property in Lacombe. However, behind closed doors, Nanette grew increasingly concerned for her safety after Steve's brother, Brian, was released from prison. Brian allegedly blamed Nanette for the legal issues that led to his incarceration and had made direct threats against her. In response, she urged for additional security measures, having cameras installed around the property and keeping protective tools in her bedroom, car, and purse. She openly shared her fears with her family. Her father and sisters, aware of the escalating tension, were alarmed but did not anticipate just how grave the situation would become. Steve was also concerned and worked with Nanette to increase security. He installed additional cameras, purchased self-defense equipment, and even practiced shooting with her at a local shooting range. However, despite these precautions, the simmering problems in their family did not go away. Behind the facade of a peaceful life, there were bitter family conflicts, growing tensions, and the choices ahead led to unforeseen consequences. On July 14, 2017, at around 2:30 p.m., the St. Tammany Parish Fire Department received an urgent call from Steve's cousin, who lived nearby. He reported seeing thick smoke rising from Steve's property and suspected the house was on fire. Despite the distance between their homes and the dense forest in between, the fire was visible from afar. Steve and his team arrived at the scene around 3 p.m. when the house was engulfed in flames. Firefighters worked into the evening to extinguish the fire, only to discover human remains in the bathroom of the master bedroom. The damage was extensive, but the location of the remains and the fact that no one else lived there indicated the victim was likely Nanette, Steve's wife. No alarms had sounded, and throughout the day, Steve's repeated calls to both Nanette's cell phone and the house landline had gone unanswered. Her car remained in the garage, further confirming she had been home at the time of the fire. Tragically, all the household pets also perished, reflecting the sudden and intense nature of the flames. Federal fire investigation specialists joined the inquiry. Initially, the fire was considered a possible accident, but the circumstances surrounding Nanette's death raised suspicions. Her remains were found in the bathroom, and there was no indication she had tried to escape. This prompted a forensic autopsy, which included DNA testing and an investigation into the cause of death. About a week later, during a memorial service, part of the coroner's preliminary findings became public. It was revealed that Nanette had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, with a bullet found in her skull. This discovery completely shifted the direction of the investigation. On July 18th, the sheriff confirmed the findings, apologized for the delay in communication, and acknowledged evidence of a criminal act. Further autopsy results showed no smoke inhalation in Nanette's lungs, proving that she had died before the fire. Since no weapon was found near her body, the possibility of self-inflicted injuries has been ruled out. The investigation further revealed the presence of 9 security cameras on the property, but Steve stated that the system had stopped functioning several days before the fire. Efforts to recover footage from the damaged equipment were unsuccessful. This lack of evidence, combined with forensic findings, suggested the fire had been intentionally set to destroy evidence. Investigators shifted their focus to individuals who might have had both motive and access to the property. However, an official statement confirming foul play in Nanette's death was not released until 4 days after the fire. The family's frustration with the investigation grew, particularly because the coroner had noted the gunshot wound the day after the incident, yet this information wasn't immediately shared with them. Nanette's sister, Kim, a prosecutor in Nebraska, publicly criticized the investigation, pointing to the lack of proper scene containment, which may have compromised evidence. When Nanette's relatives arrived in Louisiana shortly after the tragedy, they found the property unsecured and the house open. Within 2 days, Steve was allowed to return to the site, raising concerns about evidence being altered or lost. It wasn't until Steve's son, Justin, discovered a fragment of a human skull in the debris that authorities finally secured the scene. The incident has left the public losing confidence in Sheriff Randy Smith's department. While federal investigators conduct an independent analysis, they discovered multiple points of ignition and traces of accelerants, confirming the fire was deliberately set. Despite these findings, however, the sheriff did not rule out the possibility that Julie harmed herself, citing the lack of a recovered weapon and inconclusive ballistics test results. Later, 2 firearms were found in the remains of the home, but neither could be definitively linked to the fatal shot. The bullet recovered from Nanette's skull was too damaged for reliable analysis. Additional forensic tests reinforced previous findings, including finding no smoke in Nanette's lungs and no food in her stomach. Despite her having been seen purchasing food at a fast food restaurant that morning, additional inconsistencies came to light during the investigation. There was no blood on Nanette's gunshot wound to the head, as is often the case, leading to speculation that her body may have been moved after her death. An independent expert suggested that whoever moved her was likely familiar with the layout of the house. The sheriff, however, publicly disputed the forensic expert's conclusions. This discrepancy with the findings of federal agents further undermined public confidence in the investigation. Nanette's family began openly questioning the integrity of local authorities and raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest. As discrepancies mounted, the sheriff was eventually compelled to issue a public statement, acknowledging that Nanette's death resulted from a violent act. Despite this admission, the investigation failed to identify the person responsible. The case shifted towards exploring possible motives and suspects with access to the property. Nanette's husband, Steve, was naturally a key subject of interest due to his unrestricted access to the house. He willingly cooperated, volunteered for a polygraph test, and passed. However, since polygraph results are not entirely reliable, investigators didn't eliminate him as a suspect. Steve's alibi was backed by fire department security footage confirming he was at work on the day of the incident, starting at 8 a.m., and didn't leave at any point, including during lunch. This was corroborated by surveillance footage and his co-workers' testimonies. However, it was noted that Steve, working on a Friday, was unusual, as he usually took that day off. Investigators also analyzed Nanette's movements on the morning of July 14th. Traffic cameras spotted her driving between her home and a nearby fast food restaurant, where her bank card was used to buy food. Her car was later seen near her house. About an hour later, a phone call was made from Nanette's phone to an unfamiliar number. The person on the other end claimed not to know her, and the reason for the call remains unexplained. Investigators explored potential personal conflicts and discovered that Steve had been in an extramarital relationship with a colleague. Nanette was aware of the affair and had told others she was considering divorce, which under state law would involve dividing their shared assets, an arrangement that could have been financially disadvantageous for Steve. When questioned, Steve admitted to the affair but claimed the couple had reconciled and planned to stay together. Close family members were also questioned. Steve's son, Justin, had reportedly experienced tension with his stepmother, Julie. In the past, family acquaintances described him as having unusual interests, including a fascination with firearms. However, Justin provided documentation proving he was out of state for work on the day of the incident, which was verified, ruling him out as a suspect. Investigators also looked into Steve's brother, Brian, who had a criminal record and a history of family conflicts. Over the years, Nanette had voiced concerns about his behavior. Shortly after his release from prison, she sent her sister a message describing a specific threat from him, in which he allegedly displayed aggressiveness and hinted at setting the house on fire. These claims were corroborated through their text exchanges. Surveillance footage from their parents' home showed Brian did not leave the premises on the day of Nanette's death. However, a wearable tracking device issued to him malfunctioned and failed to record any location data that day, with the cause of this failure unexplained. Another puzzling incident occurred a month before Nanette's death. A security camera recorded an unidentified man near the entrance gate of the property. He left behind a cigarette butt and a knife. Nanette informed her father about the incident, but the man's identity remained unclear and no investigation was conducted to find out more. After investigating multiple leads, the case remained unsolved. Every suspect either had a confirmed alibi or there wasn't enough evidence to make a formal accusation, leaving the investigation at a dead end. 2 months after Nanette's death, the sheriff made another public announcement. He declared that Steve was no longer a person of interest in the case, explaining that Steve's alibi had been verified. There was no clear motive, and the evidence was deemed insufficient to move forward. However, Nanette's family felt this announcement was premature, as not all digital records had been reviewed. Several witnesses had yet to be re-interviewed, and a detailed timeline of her phone activity leading up to her death was still incomplete. It appeared the investigation was entering a state of stagnation. When Nanette's family requested access to the case documents, their attempts were met with vague responses. Louisiana state law restricts access to investigative materials to the closest next of kin, which in this case was Steve, not Nanette's parents or sisters. Steve did not share these documents with the rest of the family. In search of answers, Nanette's relatives turned to private attorneys and independent forensic experts. One expert, after examining the available evidence, identified signs of deliberate investigative mismanagement, noting that critical protocols for handling cases involving violent deaths and burnt evidence had been disregarded. The conclusions and methodologies of the private experts sharply contrasted with those of the local authorities. Efforts to transfer the case to a different jurisdiction proved unsuccessful. Appeals to the district attorney's office were dismissed, with officials citing a lack of legal justification to relocate the investigation. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Nanette's family turned to social media, launching a page to provide updates and highlight inconsistencies in the investigation, in the hope of pressuring authorities into action. However, the sheriff's actions became a significant obstacle to achieving transparency. His public statements, dismissal of expert findings, and personal connections to individuals potentially linked to the case raised concerns about his impartiality and deepened public mistrust. Despite multiple individuals with potential motives, the investigation failed to reach a definite conclusion. Detectives worked on verifying alibis, analyzing technical records, and identifying gaps in the official narrative. But these efforts often revealed inconsistencies that undermined the credibility of the evidence. A key issue was the absence of location data from the Jeep's-enabled ankle monitor worn by Brian. On July 14th, the day of the incident, the monitor registered no location data, an unexplained blackout. Authorities were unable to determine whether the failure was a technical error or whether the monitor had been intentionally disabled. This missing data represented a major accountability failure and raised serious questions. Another troubling discovery came from a review of footage from a security camera inside Brian's parents' home. The video depicted Brian with a working desk lamp and a visible wall clock in the background, ostensibly providing an alibi. However, Nanette's family questioned the authenticity of this footage, suggesting it could have been pre-recorded or staged. Experts also observed that the angle and focus of the camera appeared unusual for a standard household surveillance setup. Additional uncertainty arose with surveillance footage from a fast food establishment showing Nanette's vehicle. Investigators assumed she was driving the car that morning, but the video quality was too poor to verify her identity. This assumption was based solely on her bank card being used to make a purchase nearby. The situation was further complicated by the fact that there was no footage from her home surveillance system on the day of the incident. Steve claimed the cameras had not been operational at the time, but investigators later found traces of accelerant on the damaged equipment. Experts concluded that the security system had likely been intentionally tampered with before the fire, suggesting someone with knowledge of the camera's locations and purpose had interfered. After Nanette's father passed away, her sisters took the lead in demanding a proper investigation. They launched an online awareness campaign, collaborated with advocacy groups, and participated in discussions on crime-focused platforms. The family repeatedly urged state authorities to transfer the case to an independent investigative body, but their requests were consistently met with generic responses that lacked meaningful action. They were also frustrated by the investigators' failure to review footage from the citywide surveillance system, which could have offered critical context. These shortcomings formed the basis of formal complaints to the district attorney's office. Although officials promised to keep the case open, there was no evidence of real progress, receiving minimal support from local law enforcement. Nanette's family shifted their focus to building a network of allies. They connected with organizations specializing in unresolved cases, which led to increased attention on Nanette's death through podcasts, videos, and media coverage. By 2024, the case remained unsolved. However, new hope appeared when Colin Sims was elected district attorney. Colin publicly expressed his willingness to review the evidence, marking the first sign of possible investigative progress after nearly 7 years of inaction. As of March 2024, Nanette's case was still open, with no charges filed against any suspects. Despite coroner findings, witness testimonies, and independent assessments, authorities in St. Tammany Parish had yet to identify any responsible parties. What initially seemed like a straightforward case had instead devolved into a prolonged stalemate. By mid-2025, the case records were still sealed, and only individuals with legal standing, such as Nanette's husband, Steve, were granted access. The family remained barred from reviewing complete investigative reports, transcripts, or relevant surveillance data. Repeated appeals to state authorities went unanswered. In response, a grassroots group formed by Nanette's friends and family continued to provide social media updates, urging the public to come forward with any useful information. The family also sought assistance from federal agencies like the Department of Justice. In their letters, they raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest involving local authorities and petitioned for the case to be transferred to a higher jurisdiction. Independent experts consulted by the family identified numerous investigative avenues that had not been fully explored, including recovering deleted digital records and re-interviewing key witnesses. However, without official investigative authority, these proposals could not be enforced. Despite years of stagnation, Nanette's family has never stopped fighting for answers. For them, this is about more than personal grief. It is a pursuit of justice. The lack of progress has only strengthened their resolve. They firmly believe the truth can still be uncovered if independent expertise is brought in and the case is reviewed impartially. As of this report, the case remains open but inactive. Nanette Krentel's story highlights how errors, delays, and possible bias can obstruct justice in a major case. Yet, it also demonstrates the unwavering resilience of a family determined to keep her memory alive. Their goal remains unchanged: to uncover the truth, no matter how much time has passed or how many obstacles stand in their way. Caitlin Coons first met Jonathan Jones when she was only 15 years old, and he was 30. Their relationship would soon spiral into something deeply troubling. Caitlin, who had spent much of her young life in Ohio's foster care system, she was living in a group home in Canton when she first encountered Jonathan. She had faced numerous challenges throughout her childhood, bouncing between foster families and care facilities, she desperately seeking stability and someone who would truly care for her. Like many children in state custody, she had experienced multiple placements, each bringing its own disappointments. These constant moves had left her feeling abandoned, creating deep emotional wounds that made her vulnerable. Caitlin couldn't help but hope that each new placement would provide the loving, stable environment she craved, but these hopes were repeatedly dashed. Jonathan, 15 years her senior, seemed to offer the attention and affection that Caitlin had been searching for. However, their relationship was far from appropriate or legal. At 30, Jonathan was a grown man who should have known better than to pursue a romantic relationship with a 15-year-old girl. Caitlin couldn't help but be drawn to someone who appeared to understand her struggles and offered her the emotional connection she had been craving. What she didn't realize was that she was becoming involved with a predatory man who would ultimately lead her down a dark and destructive path. As their relationship developed, it became increasingly clear that Jonathan was taking advantage of Caitlin's vulnerable state. Caitlin's unstable past made her emotionally vulnerable, and she became dependent on Jonathan, who took advantage of her youth and desire for love. Jonathan manipulated Caitlin by exploiting her weaknesses. He told her she was mature, different, and their relationship was special. These tactics are commonly used by predators to make victims feel responsible for their own exploitation. Jonathan had complete control, and Caitlin became isolated, making it difficult for her to see that she was being manipulated and believed their relationship was genuine. Even though there were clear warning signs, her longing for love and inexperience with healthy relationships blinded her to the fact that she was being victimized. She saw Jonathan as her rescuer, the one finally giving her the love she desired. In March 2023, Jonathan's predatory behavior was exposed when he was convicted of enticing a child to view adult material and child endangerment. The court found that he had engaged in intimate with 15-year-old Caitlin and planned to sell photographs of their encounters. This revealed the extent of his exploitation and abuse. After the conviction, the court had ordered him to stay away from Caitlin and put a GPS tracker on him to monitor his location. Despite these efforts, tragedy was unavoidable. Nicole Jones, Jonathan's 53-year-old mother, lived in Sylvania Township. She was very worried about her son's relationship with the teenage girl, Caitlin. She was concerned about Jonathan's legal problems and the negative impact the relationship was having on both of them. As a caring mother, Nicole had seen her adult son making increasingly bad choices. She had tried to support him, but his relationship with a teenager and the resulting legal issues were almost too much to bear. Nicole felt stuck between her love for her son and her duty to protect a vulnerable young girl. The seriousness of the situation and the potential consequences of Jonathan's actions made her even more anxious. As a mother, Nicole had always tried to see the best in Jonathan, even when his behavior was clearly problematic. However, his relationship with Caitlin represented a new level of concern. The teenage girl was undeniably vulnerable and traumatized, and Jonathan appeared to be exploiting someone who needed protection. Nicole felt a sense of responsibility, not only for her son's actions, but also for Caitlin's welfare. She had repeatedly talked to Jonathan about the inappropriate nature of his relationship, pointing out the age difference and legal ramifications. She remained steadfast in her belief that Jonathan needed to end the relationship and seek help for the issues driving him to pursue someone so young and vulnerable. In April 2023, despite the court order, Caitlin made the fateful decision to leave her foster care placement in Canton. The 17-year-old girl, still deeply attached to Jonathan, couldn't resist what she believed was love. She met Jonathan at a local restaurant, and together they returned to his mother's home in Sylvania Township. Caitlin hoped this reunion would somehow make everything better, that they could find a way to be together without further problems. Nicole didn't know that Caitlin was secretly living in her house. Caitlin had climbed in through Jonathan's bedroom window and was hiding from Nicole. This created a stressful and difficult situation, as Caitlin was living a secret life in Nicole's home, where Nicole was trying to live normally. This situation put a strain on everyone. Nicole was unaware of everything happening in her own home, and it was becoming harder to keep Caitlin hidden. Caitlin had to stay quiet during the day and avoid being seen. Caitlin grew frustrated with the secrecy and the constant fear of being discovered, and she realized that this situation couldn't last. As days passed, the strain of keeping Caitlin's presence hidden became increasingly difficult. Jonathan knew it was only a matter of time before his mother discovered Caitlin's presence, and he knew his mother would not approve. It was evident that Nicole was genuinely concerned about both Jonathan's welfare and Caitlin's. However, her attempts to intervene and protect them would ultimately put her in grave danger. The tension in the household reached a breaking point when Caitlin became convinced that Nicole was the primary obstacle to her being with Jonathan. Warped by trauma and manipulation, Caitlin was unable to see that Nicole's concerns were legitimate and protective. Instead, she viewed Nicole as an enemy, deliberately trying to destroy her relationship. This perception fueled increasingly dark thoughts about how to eliminate the perceived obstacle. On April 19, 2023, Caitlin's frustration and desperation reached a dangerous crescendo. She made a decision that would forever change multiple lives. Caitlin gave Jonathan an ultimatum that was both shocking and terrifying in its cold calculation. Jonathan had 5 hours to kill his own mother, Nicole, or she would end their relationship forever. This demand was so extreme and disturbing that it revealed the depth of Caitlin's psychological disturbance and the toxic nature of their relationship. Jonathan, faced with this impossible choice, found himself paralyzed by fear and indecision. Although he had made numerous poor choices in his life, including his predatory relationship with Caitlin. The prospect of murdering his own mother was apparently beyond even his moral boundaries. As the 5-hour deadline approached, Jonathan could not bring himself to harm the woman who had given him life and had tried to help him throughout his struggles. Caitlin wanted Jonathan to kill Nicole. When he refused, she gave him an extra hour, hoping he would change his mind. But Jonathan still didn't act. So, Caitlin decided she would kill Nicole herself. She believed that for her relationship with Jonathan to work, Nicole had to die. Despite feeling troubled and pressured, she resolved to commit the murder since Jonathan wouldn't. On the evening of April 19th, 2023, Nicole Jones stood in her kitchen, facing her refrigerator. Unbeknownst to her, Caitlin was outside and had found a large rock. Caitlin brought the rock inside, intending to use it as a weapon. Nicole continued her usual evening routine, completely unaware that Caitlin was about to end her life in a shocking and violent way. Her kitchen, normally a place of comfort, was about to become the scene of a brutal crime. As Nicole stood, with her back turned, focused on whatever she was retrieving from the refrigerator, Caitlin approached from behind with the rock in her hands. In a moment of pure evil and violence, Caitlin began bludgeoning Nicole over the head with the rock, striking her multiple times with brutal force. The attack was swift and merciless, giving Nicole no opportunity to defend herself or even understand what was happening. As if the bludgeoning wasn't enough to ensure Nicole's death, Caitlin then strangled her, making certain that she would never again interfere in her relationship with Jonathan. Jonathan was in the living room when his girlfriend, Caitlin, murdered his mother in the kitchen. Instead of calling for help or trying to save her, Jonathan chose to help Caitlin hide the crime. This decision made him an accomplice in a shocking murder case. They worked together to dispose of Nicole's body. They drove to 2 local stores, purchasing a tarp and garbage bags to wrap Nicole's lifeless body. They returned to the house and wrapped Nicole's body in the materials they had purchased. After wrapping the body, Jonathan and Caitlin loaded Nicole into the trunk. In perhaps one of the most disturbing details of this case, prosecutors later revealed that Jonathan and Caitlin actually went out to dinner while Nicole's body remained in the trunk. Following their dinner, they drove to a nearby apartment complex and disposed of Nicole's body in a dumpster, treating her as mere garbage to be discarded. The dumpster was collected the following day as part of the normal garbage pickup, and Nicole's body was taken to a landfill. Even though law enforcement searched thoroughly, Nicole's body was never found. This prevents her family from having the closure they would get from a proper burial. With Nicole's body disposed of, Jonathan and Caitlin decided to flee the area to avoid prosecution. They took Nicole's 2021 Buick Encore and began driving west, eventually crossing the border into Mexico. Along with the car, they also took Nicole's social security card, identification, credit cards, and health insurance card, essentially stealing her identity along with her life. However, their escape was short-lived. Caitlin, perhaps overwhelmed by the magnitude of her actions, made a critical error that would lead to their capture. While on the run, she contacted one of her caregivers and confessed to the murder, admitting that she had killed Jonathan's mother. This confession prompted the caregiver to immediately contact law enforcement, who began working with U.S. Marshals to track down Jonathan and Caitlin. The search for Jonathan and Caitlin became an international manhunt, with law enforcement agencies on both sides of the border cooperating to locate them. Fortunately for investigators, Jonathan was still wearing the Jeep's tracking device, mandated as part of his earlier conviction. This device allowed authorities to track their movements and ultimately locate them in the municipality of Ahumada, in the state of Chihuahua, Mexico, on May 8, 2023, approximately 3 weeks after Nicole's murder. U.S. Marshals and Mexican authorities successfully apprehended both Jonathan and Caitlin. They were found in possession of Nicole's vehicle and personal documents, providing further evidence of their guilt. Jonathan and Caitlin was extradited back to the United States to face charges for their roles in Nicole's brutal murder. Before, back in Ohio, law enforcement had been conducting a thorough investigation into Nicole's disappearance and presumed death. The investigation had begun on May 5, 2023, when Canton police contacted Sylvania Township Police requesting a welfare check on Nicole Jones. When officers arrived at her condominium, they were unable to locate her despite conducting a thorough search of the premises. As the investigation unfolded, the true horror of what had transpired became clear. Detective Jake Albright of the Sylvania Township Police Department interviewed Caitlin extensively after her arrest, and she provided detailed confessions about how she had murdered Nicole. The case against both Caitlin and Jonathan was overwhelming. In addition to Caitlin's confessions, investigators had Jeep's tracking data from Jonathan's ankle monitor that corroborated the timeline of events and their movements after the murder. Surveillance footage from the stores where they purchased supplies further supported the prosecution's case against them. Initially, prosecutors charged Caitlin with aggravated murder, abuse of a corpse, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence. Given the serious nature of the charges and the calculated manner in which the crime was committed, the court decided to charge Caitlin as an adult. Despite her being only 17 at the time of the murder, Jonathan faced even more charges, including 2 counts of aggravated murder, felonious assault, aggravated burglary, aggravated robbery, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. However, as the case moved through the legal system, both defendants ultimately decided to accept plea agreements rather than face trial. On June 4, 2024, both Caitlin Coons, now 18, and Jonathan Jones, 33, appeared in Lucas County Common Police Court before judge. They each pleaded no contest to charges of aggravated murder and abuse of a corpse. As part of the plea agreement, prosecutors agreed to dismiss the remaining charges against both defendants. The judge sentenced each of them to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. While this sentence ensures that both will spend decades behind bars, it also means that they could potentially be released while still relatively young, a thought that brings little comfort to Nicole's grieving family. During the sentencing hearing, the impact of Nicole's murder on her family became painfully clear. Nicole's brother, Robert Jones, who is the administrator of her estate, spoke about the devastating effect her loss has had on their family. Lucas County Prosecutor Julia Bates addressed the case following the sentencing, acknowledging the horror of what had transpired and expressing hope that the resolution would bring some measure of peace to Nicole's family. She said, "This was a horrific event." In her statement, they are relieved to reach a resolution in this case. They hope this brings some measure of peace to Nicole Jones's family. May her memory forever live in their hearts. As a result of this case, Robert Jones, representing Nicole's estate, has filed a civil lawsuit against Caitlin and Jonathan for wrongful death. The lawsuit seeks $25,000 in damages, in addition to punitive damages and other expenses. The suit acknowledges that no amount of money can truly make up for Nicole's death and the way it occurred. A tragic part of this case is that Nicole's body has never been found. Her family has been deprived of the fundamental right to give her a proper burial and have a place to remember and honor her. Not knowing where Nicole's remains are located intensifies their suffering. This case serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences that can result from predatory relationships and the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. Caitlin, who began as a victim of Jonathan's inappropriate pursuit when she was just 15, ultimately became a perpetrator of one of the most brutal murders imaginable. While this transformation does not excuse her actions, it highlights the complex dynamics that can develop when adults prey upon children who are already struggling with trauma and instability. The residents of Sylvania Township, especially those in Nicole's condominium complex, were deeply disturbed by the terrible crime. Many residents are elderly and had moved there because they thought it was a safe and peaceful place to live. The shocking murder of their neighbor by her son and his teenage girlfriend destroyed their feeling of safety and showed that violence can happen anywhere, even in quiet communities. As this case comes to a close with the sentencing of both perpetrators, Nicole Jones's family continues to struggle with their immense loss. It was evident to everyone that Nicole Jones was a caring mother who had tried to protect both her son and the teenage girl her son was exploiting. Her concern for their welfare ultimately cost her life as she became the victim of a crime so brutal and senseless that it continues to shock all who learn about it. Christopher Moyer was born on May 21, 1967, into a middle-class family. He valued independence and believed that education was the key to achieving it. Although he didn't have many friends, this didn't bother him much, as he spent most of his free time studying. After finishing school, he attended college, where he developed a strong interest in computers and technology. His dream was to become self-employed after earning his degree. Beyond his career goals, he also dreamed of starting a family. By 2010, Christopher was 44 years old and had realized his aspirations. He was self-employed, working as his own boss, and happily married. He lived in a spacious house in Pennsylvania with his wife and son. He worked as a freelance computer specialist, assembling custom computers for clients from his home. His wife, Irina Moyer, was skilled in electronics and assisted him with his work. She was born on August 12, 1971, which made her 39 years old in 2010. Irina was originally from Ukraine and had moved to the United States in search of a better life. She met Christopher in April 2002 during a challenging time in his life. He was going through a difficult divorce from his first wife, with whom he had no children. This experience left Christopher longing for a large, loving family. Irina also shares this dream and hopes to build a new life in the United States. Their relationship developed quickly, and later, that same year, they decided to get married. They began planning for their future, which included moving out of Christopher's bachelor home to a place more suitable for a family. Before they could find a new home, Irina discovered she was pregnant. In 2003, they purchased a large, cozy house in a quiet suburb of Orrington. The area was peaceful, scenic, and much safer than the bustling city where Christopher had previously lived. Although the local residents formed a close-knit community, the Moyers were more reserved, choosing to keep to themselves. Over the years, neighbors described them as withdrawn and rarely seen in the neighborhood. While they didn't socialize or attend local gatherings, they weren't entirely disconnected. For example, Christopher once arranged for shared use of a snowblower with his neighbors. However, in most cases, the family preferred solving problems independently. On September 25, 2003, Irina gave birth to their first and only child, Dylan Moyer. By 2010, Dylan was 7 years old and thriving in school. Having successfully completed the first grade, he was a bright, intelligent child, and his parents were incredibly proud of him. Teachers, both from his kindergarten and primary school, regularly praised Dylan for his abilities. Much of his success stemmed from the active involvement of both his parents in his education. Being highly educated themselves, Christopher and Irina prioritized their son's learning and supported him every step of the way. While they avoided participating in the neighborhood's social life, they always attended school meetings together, demonstrating their dedication to helping Dylan succeed in both academics and life. Christopher was known as a calm, grounded individual, and his wife, Irina, shared many of his qualities. Both were thoughtful and quiet, preferring action over conversation. Their closest neighbor, Rose Radziul, knew them better than anyone else in the area. Although they were on friendly terms, Rose described Christopher and Irina as reserved, meek, and silent. Their interactions with her rarely extended beyond simple greetings and polite exchanges. Notably, Rose noticed that Christopher had a tendency to be controlling and domineering towards Irina. She noticed that Irina seemed to become more withdrawn when she was with Christopher, often avoiding communication so as not to upset him. Their son, Dylan, however, was different. Teachers regarded him as an exceptionally bright and curious boy. By kindergarten, he had a vocabulary beyond his years and often impressed or puzzled adults with his questions. Dylan's primary school teacher was particularly fond of him, recognizing his great potential early on. Instead of playing typical games for children his age, Dylan showed an interest in scientific literature, often reading during his free time. Like his parents, he was not highly social, but he maintained good relationships with his peers. Irina was described as a loving and devoted mother who prioritized her son's well-being and development. Despite her shy and unsociable personality, Christopher, similarly, was regarded as a caring father, deeply invested in Dylan's well-being. According to relatives, the family had created a warm and nurturing home environment, rooted in love for each other and their child. A few months before the tragedy, the family had even taken a trip to Disneyland, making the events of June 17, 2011 all the more shocking. At 9:40 p.m. on that fateful Friday, 44-year-old Christopher called emergency services. He calmly confessed to killing his wife and son with a baseball bat, stating that both were dead and refusing to offer any first aid. His cold and detached tone during the call was unsettling, as if he were discussing something mundane. He gave a detailed account of the crime, describing how he had killed Irina by beating her to death before attacking their son Dylan. He even supplied his personal information and the family's home address, thanked the dispatcher, and hung up. Emergency responders rushed to the Moyer family home, where they encountered a chilling scene. When no one answered the door, authorities initially suspected Christopher had barricaded himself inside and might be armed. A note taped outside listed the names and contact details of relatives, suggesting that Christopher had prepared for what was to come. Neighbors began to gather, watching the tense situation unfold. The police believed Christopher might resist arrest, but then someone noticed one of the family's cars was missing. This raised the possibility that Christopher had fled. By 2 a.m., officers entered the home through an open garage door. They proceeded cautiously, weapons drawn, but found no one alive inside. Instead, they were met with a gruesome scene. On the second floor, they discovered two bodies, 7-year-old Dylan and 39-year-old Irina. Both had suffered severe head trauma from a blunt object, their skulls brutally disfigured. Irina's body was found in the bathroom adjacent to the main bedroom. Bloodstains and drag marks suggested that her body had been moved there after the attack. A towel was also placed over her face, a gruesome detail that added to the haunting scene. Christopher, however, was nowhere to be found. Dylan's room was nearby. He was found in his bedroom with injuries similar to those of Irina. A bloody baseball bat, believed to be the murder weapon, was lying next to his body. The bat was sent to a lab for analysis, as the caller on the emergency line had predicted. The police activity quickly attracted the attention of the neighbors, especially Rose, who was close to the family. When Rose goes to find out what is going on, she is horrified by the brutal attack on the Moyer family, and is even more shocked when she hears Christopher confess over the phone that he killed his own family. The police immediately questioned Rose, hoping she might have heard or seen something since she was at home during the time of the murders. However, Rose stated that she hadn't heard any screams or disturbances, only the sound of a car engine leaving the Moyer residence, which she assumed was Christopher fleeing the scene. She also noted that she hadn't noticed anything unusual or any warning signs of such a violent event. Rose shared detailed information about the family, with the police being particularly interested in Christopher, who was missing. They needed to determine the direction he might have gone in and whether he had taken a weapon with him, as one neighbor had suggested. Christopher had reportedly told the emergency dispatcher that he planned to wait for the police to arrive. Yet, for reasons unknown, he was gone by the time officers reached the crime scene. Rose described Christopher as calm and introverted, adding that she couldn't imagine him committing such an atrocity. She noted that, although he wasn't very affectionate towards his wife, they seemed happy in public, and she had never seen him argue with his wife or scold his son. Forensic experts and detectives thoroughly combed the crime scene, working to piece together what had transpired. No signs of a break-in were discovered, and all the available evidence pointed to Christopher's responsibility for the attack. Fearing that his mental state had deteriorated and that he might harm someone else, authorities launched an urgent manhunt. Despite this, Christopher's actions didn't fit the profile of a typical serial killer or maniac. 2 hours after police arrived at the house, they were still searching intensively for Christopher. They tried reaching him on his mobile phone, but he didn't respond to any calls. During the investigation, security footage from a nearby camera captured Christopher's car, narrowing down the potential routes he could have taken. Road services and patrol units were alerted and stationed at strategic points in an effort to intercept him. Yet Christopher seemed to have vanished. At 12:56 a.m., a witness from a neighboring town called Hadborough rang the police. The caller, a train engineer, reported finding a body on the railway tracks. Tragically, the man on the tracks matched Christopher's description. According to the engineer, the train was unable to stop in time to avoid hitting the man. Authorities arrived at the scene and found a body, later identified as Christopher, through documents found in his possession. His pocket contained $300 in cash and car keys. A dark Toyota Camry, registered to Christopher, was located near the railroad crossing. The police concluded that Christopher had deliberately ended his life shortly after the murders. He appeared to have been familiar with the train's schedule and intentionally positioned himself on the tracks to coincide with the arrival of an oncoming train. As a result, the entire Moyer family died, leaving many unanswered questions about this horrific incident. Irina's parents, along with her brother and sister-in-law, were in a neighboring town when the news broke. The police contacted them to inform them of the deaths of Irina, Dylan, and Christopher. During questioning, the family revealed that the Moyers had planned to visit them that weekend. According to their plans, Christopher, Irina, and Dylan were supposed to drive over on Saturday night. After the visit, Dylan was meant to stay with his grandparents for a few days, while his parents spent time alone together, with the grandparents later returning Dylan home. The tragic events, however, unfolded just days before this planned visit. Shortly before the tragic events, Irina's parents tried to call her, but their calls went unanswered. They were not overly concerned, assuming the family had gone to bed early to prepare for their long journey. Relatives of theirs stated that they had spoken with the Moyers on Friday morning, when both Irina and Christopher seemed cheerful and did not mention any issues. They were busy making final preparations for their trip. Neither Irina nor Christopher had a history of mental health problems, which made the tragic events even more shocking. Christopher's parents were also informed of the tragedy. His father reported speaking with him on the same day and noted nothing unusual or alarming. Christopher had mentioned extending a contract with a major client, which made him optimistic about his upcoming weekend plans and improving his financial situation. Their family had been dealing with financial struggles recently due to the instability of freelance work. Christopher had expressed concerns about potentially losing their home, but the issue appeared to have been resolved. It seemed he was simply worried that such financial difficulties could return. When friends and family were questioned, none could provide a motive for the tragedy. Christopher, described as a loving husband and father, seemed incapable of such violence. What could have driven him to kill his entire family and take his own life? Their family was private, rarely sharing details of their personal lives. The medical examiner's office conducted autopsies on Irina and Dylan. Both were found to have died from multiple blunt force head injuries inflicted with extreme force and determination. However, these findings provided no insight into why Christopher, a man with no history of depression or violent tendencies, would commit such a horrific act. Family members described Irina as loyal to her husband, leading a quiet life with minimal social interactions beyond her neighbors and her child's teachers. Their relationship was considered healthy and loving. Christopher was seen as a hard-working man who provided for his family and never displayed depressive behaviors or violent tendency. Adding to the mystery, Christopher left no suicide note to shed light on what led to this devastating act. Key documents found in the house revealed crucial details. Investigators discovered that the family was at risk of losing their $450,000 home. Christopher had received a foreclosure notice just days before the tragedy, and they lacked the funds to resolve their financial troubles. This crushing reality may have driven Christopher to despair. It is believed that he had planned to harm himself, but in his state of anguish and loss of reason, he could not bear to leave his wife and children to face poverty and hardship. He may have convinced himself that killing his family was a way to shield them from future suffering. Despite this theory, the exact motive remains uncertain. Detectives carefully examined all evidence and consulted psychiatric experts on such behavior. Typically, such actions are linked to underlying mental health problems. However, Christopher had no diagnosed mental health illnesses and exhibited no signs of significant struggles beforehand. Relatives shared that Christopher had been deeply stressed by financial issues. Their family had previously faced the threat of losing their home in 2006, but succeeded in overcoming the challenge. The family lived modestly, but this time, the situation appeared dire and irreparable. There was no evidence to suggest that Christopher had been struggling with severe mental health issues or that he had planned the tragedy long in advance. Experts instead believe the decision may have been impulsive, driven by the overwhelming tension that Christopher had quietly been battling on his own. Christopher's father was aware that his son would never seek help from a psychiatrist, no matter how severe the situation became. There had been a suspicion that Christopher might have used illegal substances, but this was proven false. Toxicological tests confirmed that his blood was clean. However, this detail provided another clue: Christopher was not taking any prescribed medication, indicating that he had avoided seeking medical help for his anxiety or other possible issues. The forensic investigation continued, uncovering troubling evidence. The blood found on a baseball bat near Dylan's body was identified as belonging to both Dylan and Irina. Fingerprints on the other end of the stick showed it was Christopher's. Besides, footprints and additional evidence from the family home allowed investigators to piece together the tragic sequence of events. The Friday morning when the tragedy unfolded had seemed normal, but Christopher had likely already made his decision. A trip was planned for the following day, and his wife and son went to bed early that evening. Christopher, however, stayed awake, unable to sleep. At some point, he retrieved a baseball bat from the garage and waited for his family to fall into a deep sleep. He did not want to make noise or raise suspicion. Christopher's actions suggested that he wanted to carry out his plans swiftly, though calling it humane would be a stretch. He first entered the bedroom he shared with his wife and attacked her suddenly. The first blow to her head caused fatal injuries, leaving her unable to scream or resist. Christopher proceeded to strike her multiple times, breaking her skull. He likely believed that ensuring her death quickly was necessary. Irina succumbed to internal bleeding within minutes, and forensic evidence showed that she had no defensive wounds, indicating she had been caught completely off guard. Next, Christopher turned to his son, Dylan, who was asleep in his room. He killed him in the same manner, with the boy unaware of what was happening. Afterward, Christopher dragged his wife's body to the bathroom adjacent to their bedroom, leaving a blood trail behind. The reason for this act remains unknown. Additionally, he covered her face with a towel, a gesture often associated with remorseful killers who cannot bear to look at the consequences of their actions. After the murders, Christopher did not immediately call emergency services. Instead, he wrote a note listing the contact information of family members, presumably to assist authorities in reaching them. He also sent a text message to his father, apologizing. At the time, his father had no idea what had occurred and did not understand the gravity of the message. The violent events were entirely unexpected and shocking, even to those closest to Christopher. After bidding farewell to his family and leaving behind clues, Christopher called 911 to confess his actions. However, he did not wait for the police to arrive. He needed to act quickly to position himself at a reachable section of the train tracks before it was too late. This urgency may explain why he left no explanation for his actions in his note. He also chose not to leave a will, possibly because the family possessed very few valuables. Only 2 cars remained. Their most valuable property had already been lost, and they had no savings. A key document found in the house provided critical insight into the double murder. It revealed that the family had been struggling with financial problems for an extended period. Christopher's freelance work was insufficient to support a family of 3. Years earlier, he had faced the risk of losing their home for the first time. Thankfully, they managed to make the necessary payments in 2006 and kept their house. However, their financial situation deteriorated further in 2010. By September of that year, debts were mounting once again. Family members and neighbors suspected that the financial troubles were linked to money and real estate. Unfortunately, Christopher had kept his struggles private and did not ask for help, so no one realized how severe their situation had become, not even his relatives. Psychiatric experts concluded that Christopher decided to kill his family when he realized they were unable to escape their financial difficulties. In his distorted reasoning, he believed that taking their lives was the only way to spare them from a life of poverty. His disturbed state of mind led him to view this act as a twisted form of mercy. After the investigation was concluded, the case was closed. Irina and Dylan Moyer were buried together in Pennsylvania, near a city nearby. There is less information available about Christopher's funeral, but it is known that he was buried separately, far from his wife and child. Irina's family insisted on this, as they believed it was unfair to bury the murderer with Irina and Dylan.